Okay, well, I think we're ready to get started. One thing that I want to note off the top is that materials for this meeting are available on the website for this study. I'll pop that website into the chat. And I emailed that link out to members of the work group this morning, and one of them just now. We have a new member, so welcome to Maggie Talmadge that just joined the group. Nice to have her back in Oregon. And with that said, I will go ahead and hand the baton over to our director, Janine Benner.
Thanks, Christy, and good morning, everyone. For those I haven't met, again, my name is Janine Benner. I'm the director of the Oregon Department of Energy, and I have the honor of welcoming you all to this workshop this morning. Mostly, I just want to say thank you for being a part of the department's work to look at small-scale renewable energy projects. We really appreciate the leadership shown by the work group members, and also appreciate everyone else being here to share your perspectives. Your participation will make sure that we have the information we need to complete a study that's valuable to the legislature and advances this conversation. Next slide, please. So for those of you who may not be familiar with the Oregon Department of Energy, this slide shows our mission and an articulation of what we do. We help Oregonians make informed decisions and maintain a resilient and affordable energy system. We advance solutions to shape an equitable clean energy transition, protect the environment and public health, and responsibly balance energy needs and impacts for current and future generations. And this study, I think, is an example of the department's role as a central repository of energy data, information, and analysis, and also hopefully our role as a venue for problem-solving Oregon's energy challenges. I think we all recognize the important role that small-scale renewable projects can play as the state transitions to a equitable clean energy future, and really excited to hear the conversation this morning. And again, appreciate you all being here. And now I will hand it back to Christy.
Thanks, Rob. If you want to go to the next slide. Great. So we just want to make a couple of notes as we get started. We'll be recording this meeting and we'll post it online for reference in the same spot where you can find the meeting materials. I just put the link in the chat there. You feel free to use the chat to ask questions along the way. I'll be monitoring the chat and I'll make sure to get your questions slid in at the appropriate moment. And then you can also use the raise hand function to show us that you're interested in making a comment or sharing something. For the most part, for this meeting, we have space reserved for public comment. This is a meeting of a work group. And so work group members, you don't need to wait to be unmuted or anything. It'd be great if you raised your hand so that we could kind of make sure that it's an organized conversation in a virtual setting, but just know that you have the powers. And then when we get to the time for public comment, we'll make sure that we are talking to the folks that are joining in, and it's great to see so many names that I recognize listening in this morning. And then also, we just want you to know that I posted the meeting materials. We'll be working with you on the making plans for the next advisory committee meeting. We already have the date set for that, but just remind you about that and kind of talk about next steps toward the end. And then also we have that public comment I mentioned. And then next I'll show you a little bit about the WebEx features and functionality, since I know it's not everyone's sort of like native virtual language, I suppose. So you can raise your hand in a couple of different ways. There's a little raise hand button at the bottom of your screen that looks like almost like a little fist. And then you can also, next to your name, there's a clickable spot where you can raise your hand that way as well. And then also you can unmute yourself down at the bottom as well for those of you that are on the advisory committee. And you can also stop your video down there too. All right, I think that's good for logistics. If anyone has any questions, it's a great time to ask them. I don't see any hands up from our advisory group, nor from our attendees. And we can go ahead and move on, Rob.
All righty. Let's see, I think we got through all the WebEx logistics here, so let's get through. Hopefully folks are used to running these things now. I know they're all a little different, and a little irritating in different ways, but okay.
I can do this one too.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, Rob. We've kind of talked through a lot of this already as we went. So just one thing I didn't cover was community agreements. And these are agreements that we've borrowed from an equity training that a lot of us attended a while back and thought worked really well. And we've been using them for these meetings. We presented these at this work group the first time, and then also at our other various study work groups. And just a reminder to be present and ready to learn. There's going to be a lot of this particular work group is charged with putting together the report for this study for putting together the results of this study. And so we want to make sure folks are really listening. We're going to provide instructions later for how to make sure that as we go from the conversation today to turning that into what will become the report, we're hearing from you. So please be present, ready to learn, be respectful of others. Remember that learning happens outside of our comfort zone. So if you hear something that you disagree with or makes you uncomfortable, try to sit with that as someone else's experience and then reflect back on your own too. Listen to learn and not to respond. And then thank you for being flexible around technology needs or changes. And if you need something at this meeting, you can ask for it. And if you have any issues, actually this says contact Linda in the chat, which is normally the case for this study, but actually Stacy is subbing in for us today. So you can chat to Stacy or to me and we'll make sure that we take care of you. Next slide, Rob. And then this is the agenda for today. It's also in the meeting materials if you want to refer back to it later. We'll be going over background, definitions, key questions, and then we'll actually be hearing from a lot of the members of our work group and some special guests on perspectives from different types of owners of renewable projects. We'll do a break at 10:45, and then we'll do a bunch of work kind of sitting with the content and talking through some of the issues. And then we'll close the meeting at 1 o'clock. Anything you want to add on the agenda, Rob?
Nope, I don't think so.
All right, next slide.
Okay.
And then finally, just want to say thank you again and build on to Janine to just really appreciate your time today. And then also just a quick note about what this study is asking us to do. And we as a department are to convene you, the work group, to examine opportunities to encourage development of small scale and community-based renewable energy projects in the state that contribute to economic development and local energy resiliency. So just so we all remember from the beginning that that's our charge as a group.
All righty. Thank you, Christy. Now that we've got that down, and according to our agenda, we should be starting background right now. So it's 9:10 and we're right on schedule. I'm going to go through some materials in a few slides that are shared in a little more detail in the materials that we posted online and shared with you all. This is very much the beginning of background content that will be included in the report. And we see this as a work in progress. And you'll see that a lot of the slides that I'm sharing are essentially sharing incomplete information. And that's part of the design here, is that we want to complete the picture, and that's why we're doing this study. And so there's a few question marks that are on these slides. We recognize that what we have now for background information is largely known by many of you. And for those of you who are not familiar with all of the terms, I'm just going to go through a few of them at a high level. And we've kind of focused on the definitions and policies in Oregon that we think have an effect on ownership models. And so we'll look at some of those, and basically we just want to set the stage for our ownership discussion, so that at 9:30, when we start hearing from our ownership experts, we might have a little more background, or just be in the right landscape to have that discussion. So I'm going to go through these slides, and again, this is a very high level description, and we welcome your feedback probably after the meeting for how we build up this content to be most valuable in the report. The first thing that we wanted to share, when we're talking about ownership of projects and how benefits flow from kind of the project owner to either participants in a project like a community solar project, or if they are strictly financial benefits that are accruing to an owner. There's a few different ways that the energy coming off of these projects can be valued. And the first one we're sharing is net metered systems. And in Oregon, net metered systems vary in size according to the utility service territory that you're in, or I should say the maximum size varies. But these systems are the ones that are installed on the customer side of the meter and essentially create a credit on a utility bill. And net metering is required in Oregon up to a aggregate capacity of 0.5% of peak load. And some of our utilities have already hit that 0.5% of peak load represented in net metered systems. And so they offer net metering essentially at their discretion at this point. We also have these size limitations in consumer-owned utility territories. The limit is 25 kilowatts. And in IOU territories, the maximum size is 2 megawatts. And as far as the value goes, because this is serving as a net calculation on a utility bill, the value of the energy is at the retail rate, except when you overproduce. And then there's some variation around the state for how utilities deal with overproduction. But generally, it's either valued at avoided cost rates or donated to low-income assistance programs. And then kind of moving up in the scale, we go to these PURPA projects, or Public Utility Regulatory Policies Act. PURPA are the projects that are small-scale projects. They have a model where they are selling energy directly to a utility and not net metered on a customer side of a utility meter. For solar projects, the PURPA size limit is 3 megawatts. For wind, I believe it's 10 megawatts. And those limits refer to the size of facility that will be offered a standard contract under PURPA. And these standard contracts are essentially pre-negotiated avoided cost rates that are established by the investor-owned utilities. And we'll actually have a quick peek at one of those in the next slide. But before we do that, we'll look at power purchase agreements as well. And these tend to be the systems, in the case of solar, that are larger than 3 megawatts, in the case of wind, larger than 10, or any other project where the reimbursement rate for the energy is negotiated on a contract by contract basis with the utility. And so in a lot of cases, these power purchase agreements actually end up with rates that are lower than the PURPA projects. And again, these are negotiated at the time of contracting with the, between the project developer or owner and the utility. Again, we're just doing a very high level look here. This is a little slice of Schedule 38 avoided cost rates published by Pacific Power. I just wanted to share this so that you could see how the rates sort of work. This is for solar projects up to 3 megawatts in size. And you can see that they have different rates for fixed versus tracking solar systems. Also different rates for on-peak energy versus off-peak energy. And in this particular schedule, on-peak is, I believe it's 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. Monday through Saturday, and all other hours are off-peak. But again, this is determined with the help of the PUC and the utilities. And so these rates are a matter of, basically a process to establish these reimbursement rates. You can see that there's also a solar integration charge. And so these are essentially negatively impact rates, and this is the cost of integration within the rate for the utility to integrate these intermittent resources. And so I just wanted to share that as a peek at how these avoided cost rates look. This is just a slice out of the schedule, stops at 2026, but if you have the whole sheet, it goes all the way out to 2040. And I just didn't put the whole thing in because it got too small to read. But these exist for a variety of different technologies. And there's also a separate schedule to look at the essentially the ownership of the renewable energy attributes. John, I see your hand is up.
Hey, thanks, Rob. Sorry, guys, I was a little bit late. I had some technical difficulties this morning. And maybe you covered it, I just missed it. So what are these numbers? Are these cents per kilowatt hour? Or are they, what are the, like 21 going across, F is 5.02, the G is 4.07, so on and so forth. What does that represent, Rob?
It is cents per kilowatt hour, which is shown up at kind of mid-screen where it says standard fixed avoided cost prices for fixed and tracking solar, QF, which is qualifying facility, and then cents per kilowatt hour. We also often see these referred to in dollars per megawatt hour, but it's just a matter of converting between kilowatt hour and megawatt hour. But does that answer the question, John?
Yes, it does, Rob. Thank you very much.
You bet. Mark?
Yeah, thanks, Rob. And my computer had to restart right when you started, so you might have already answered this one also, so I apologize. Looking at the price per kilowatt hour, I can make some assumptions why it went back up in 2026, but could you explain why and if that trend continues to 2040?
I am not an expert on these rates. However, there are what they refer to as sufficiency periods for when the utilities need to either procure renewables or maybe not need to procure renewables. So oftentimes jumps in rates refer to a time when their sufficiency period is over. I don't know if that is the cause for that jump in 2026 on this particular rate schedule. Adam, maybe you have an answer for that one?
I don't. I was just gonna. I know we have some folks from PacifiCorp on the line. I don't know if they have better background on this. Not to put you on the spot.
It was more a curiosity question than anything.
So this is Eric Anderson from Pacific Power, and while I'm not the expert on avoided costs, I do believe that line does suggest the deficiency period and the sufficiency. So we basically have enough resources now, and then through our IRP planning, it suggests in 2026 that we'll need more resources. So there'll be a bump in the avoided cost price. Those are modified, and the costs are modified annually and within 6 months of the release, or is it 60 days? I think it's 60 days within the release or acknowledgement of the IRP. So they do change. Because the integrated resource plan is where we sort of project what resources we need to serve the system. And that's where these values are determined. And to Rob's point, it is a relatively contentious calculation that the PUC and stakeholders in the utility sort of work through, have sort of developed a methodology for calculating these costs. And actually, there's an open docket at the PUC right now to reevaluate and perhaps modernize how these rates are calculated.
Thank you, Eric. Oriana?
Yeah, this might be too weedsy a question, so my apologies, but how do markets factor into this forecasting? Just thinking about utilities going to more market purchases versus kind of more fixed resources in the system or balancing needs for the future. Does that get factored into this avoided cost prediction for a future in which markets are going to be a bigger part of our energy mix?
So that one stumped me. I think that through that IRP process and the negotiated dockets through PUC, that there are a lot of things taken into consideration, but I would welcome Adam or Eric if there's a specific answer to that markets question.
I'll take a first stab, and then Adam, you can build on it. So during the integrated resource planning process, we come up with a least cost, least risk, or I guess it's a preferred portfolio where we determine what our targets are for different resources, market or front office transactions, which is basically relying on the market to provide us sufficiency. Or to sort of meet the needs, for resources at the time, are sort of there's predictions of costs and there's predictions of the risks of those, and the reliance that the utility will place on that is sort of created. So we basically have a target of how much risk we're willing to accept based on what our anticipated future of markets are. And I don't know what, the 2021 IRP has in it for how much we'll be relying on just being able to get power off of the market when we need it. But it definitely, and I guess, to be honest, I don't know the specifics of how that reliance on market transactions sort of feeds into the avoided cost pricing, or directly, or if it does. Basically, the avoided costs are, based on when we're building resources. So I don't want to get too far out over my ski tips. But yeah, they are factored in mostly in how we do in the integrated resource planning process.
Thank you, Eric.
I don't have too much to add here. Thanks, Eric. I didn't know if, I didn't think we have folks from the PUC on the line. I don't know if they have any thoughts to add on this. It's really, avoided cost pricing is really more of something that happens there at the PUC.
I see that we had James, your hand was up next, and then Jimmy.
Oh, and hey, this is Keisha at the Keisha Brockman at the Oregon Public Utility Commission. So
Yes.
I don't think I can answer the question better than Eric did, but I can tell you that the avoided cost docket at the PUC is docket number UM 2000. And I would be happy to get information and bring it back if that would be helpful.
Great.
Thanks, Keisha, and thank you, Rob. I guess I don't have an answer, but maybe just a clarification that might be helpful. So my understanding of the whole qualifying facilities purpose structure is that these are the prices paid for a fixed period of time into the future. And, throughout the American West and different PUCs, there's a lot of contentious dockets about both the rate as well as how long those QF contracts should be for. I think partially because of that question of how much into the future we can know avoided prices, but that this does provide kind of a predictable schedule for folks that are developing these projects for the period of time into whatever is below 2026. Is that correct? in my understanding of how it works?
I think that's a really nice little summary. Yeah, that it is about a predictable rate schedule for these smaller projects. All righty. If there's, Jimmy, PGE.
Yeah, thanks, Robert. This is Jimmy Lindsay at PGE is just going to weigh in with some helpful information for this conversation. Speaking to, PGE's avoided cost design. There was a question a moment ago as how do markets fit into this, and was just going to offer the information that sort of generally the way that these avoided cost structures work is that in this deficiency period that for PGE is before 2025, the pricing is largely a function of the forward market price. In that after the deficiency period, the avoided cost prices are largely associated with the levelized cost of the avoided renewable resource. So market prices and sort of the reliance on market that's sort of strongly featured in the deficiency period and the sufficiency period. In the deficiency period, in PG's case, after 25, pricing is related to the sort of levelized cost associated with the avoided resource. So just wanted to offer that for the group's consideration.
Thanks, Jimmy. And I think we'll take Angela's question and then move on. We can pick this up later, but we're kind of, we're testing the schedule a little bit here. So Angela, go for it.
Thanks. And this might be covered later, but I was wondering, I know that for the non-standard contract PURPA projects, which I believe can be up to 80 megawatts, I know there isn't a chart like this because they're all negotiated, but can you give us some kind of sample pricing or sample avoided costs, or maybe the utilities could do that so we can get a sense of how those are different?
I cannot, although I know that the non-standard contracts on the same page where I got the Schedule 38 off the Pacific Power webpage, they had some information on those rates. Obviously, the rates are not part of those documents because they are negotiated. I don't have access to those, but that's something we could try to follow up with. There's been some very well publicized rates that I've seen from other states and, maybe most recently in Idaho. And it brings up an interesting point that these negotiated rates, especially with the recent solar projects, have actually been putting downward pressure, especially on the traditional daytime peak rates. And that could eventually work its way into these standard avoided cost rates where we see either the peak periods changing or daytime rates being a little more depressed. And so it's a good question. I think it's one for another discussion on another day. But I'm glad we had this little sidetrack because it sets the stage nicely for our ownership discussion today. And I'd like to just go through a couple of more slides and then we can hear from our actual ownership experts and some perspectives from a few of our work group and a few of our guests. So let me move on and we can put some more discussion about avoided rates into kind of a parking lot discussion because it's an important part of the discussion. Okay, so specific challenges associated with ownership of renewables. One thing we're seeing more and more is when we talk about community level renewables, especially in the rural parts of the state, there are capacity issues with public bodies that may consist of 1 or 2 part-time staff. Difficult to fill out the grants to get the projects funded, to have the technical capacity to see these projects through. So that's one of our challenges. Financing is a challenge, and we'll hear more about that from our ownership perspectives. But especially with some of the ownership models that are less traditional, the institutions that provide financing may not yet be comfortable with some of the cooperatively owned projects or some of the more innovative atypical ownership structures that we're seeing. Finally, outreach gaps. We're seeing that traditionally underserved communities may have kind of lacked the outreach that we get throughout, greater Portland and the Valley and in Bend. And there's a lot of communities throughout the state that just haven't had the same level of outreach and education about all the various opportunities and programs that are out there. This is a case where I've added others, and we have another workshop which is all about the barriers and the benefits and things like that. So this is one where we will continue to fill out the picture as part of the report, but these are just a few of the immediate challenges that I wanted to touch on. We have some programs that are supporting diverse access. Our own community renewable energy grant program that came through House Bill 2021 supports diverse ownership in a couple of ways. One, the grants are only open to public bodies, so that's going to support ownership by public entities, which has not been that common traditionally. And then also the incentives can cover up to 100% of project cost. And that will enable communities with less resources or ownership models that are unable to leverage the federal tax credits to have a shot at developing some projects. And then, of course, the Oregon Community Solar Program is all about these cooperatively owned projects with benefits accruing to a variety of individuals. They have virtual net metering, which enables benefits to go directly through utility billing. And finally, their reimbursement rate is considerably higher than the avoided cost rates for those projects, which should support more diverse ownership. Finally, here's just a quick look at a few ownership models, and this is really to set the stage for our ownership experts. And Diane, I see your hand is up.
Hi, yeah, Rob, thank you. So I'm on the webinar now, and I can visually see where I was on phone before. But Diane Hinkles for Small Business Utility Advocates, interested in the small commercial customers. And I just wanted to flag, when you're making these references, since some of these apply more to investor-owned or community or consumer-owned utilities, it'd be very helpful if you can if you're talking about a bill or, recently enacted opportunities, if you could make sure you keep that in mind as to the spread of the opportunity into which jurisdictions. Thank you.
That's a really good point. And really on the previous slide, the community solar program, that's a great example. It's only available to customers in investor-owned utility service territories. So thank you, Diane. And moving on, different ownership models. We have those net metered systems, which are directly owned and interconnected behind the meter on customer projects. Community shared renewables, cooperative local ownership, flip structures that may incorporate a tax equity partner that can own the project for a certain amount of time to collect the federal tax benefits, and then flip ownership to an entity other than the tax partner after that. Municipally owned projects is a form of project that we hope to see more of. Here's another one where we have a question mark. We hope to fill out this list as we proceed through this workshop and through the study. So with that, yes, James, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Just wanted to note a couple things kind of about community solar. One, there have been consumer-owned utilities that have offered subscription-based community solar programs. So while the Oregon Community Solar Program is specific to the investor-owned utilities, there are opportunities that COUs have created kind of independently on their own as well. So including Ashland, which was the first to offer some sort of shared benefit solar project. So I just wanted to highlight that. And then there was a note from Oriana in the chat where you named community solar as a form of cooperative ownership, and just wanted to note that that's not always the case. The ownership is separate often from the subscription and benefits of the project, which I think we'll hear about a little bit today.
Yes, two good points. Thanks, James. And actually on the first point, that's a perfect segue to our first speaker, which is Ryan Davies with Central Electric Co-op. And they are one of the non-IOUs that have blazed a trail for community solar in Oregon. And so I would like to pass it on to Ryan to share some thoughts about how Central Electric Co-op has handled ownership of a community solar resource.
Excellent. Can you hear me okay, Rob?
It's a little quiet.
Okay. Is that any better?
We can hear you okay. It is a little quiet, but we'll just all be quiet.
I'll try to speak loudly then. That sounds good. I was going to say, James, that was a great segue in. So thank you very much. We are a consumer-owned, not-for-profit electric utility. We are member-owned. And my name is Ryan Davies. I'm the Director of Customer and Energy Services for Central Electric Cooperative. So we serve about 5,300 square miles of territory in Central Oregon. We've got 30,000 members and 36,000 approximate meters. And one of the reasons, or one of the things we look for, is just response to member inquiry, being able to meet our member needs. And that's really why this project, or how this project came to fruition, was the desire for members to be able to participate in solar without having the opportunity potentially on the net metering side. On the net metering side, just for a little background, we do have an extremely robust net metering offering, close to about 500 members so far, which is great. We've far exceeded our 0.5% capacity and continue to offer that through our net metering program. So in response to member inquiries, we wanted to be able to provide an option for solar for those members to participate that might be renters, may have financial limitations to be able to install a full system, or have geographical, structural or spatial limitations, whatever it may be. We wanted to offer this subscription-based model, and that's what we set out to do. Now, this was back in 2015. We started construction. The project came online in January 2016. It's a 200 kW system at our Bend Service Center office, right next to the facility there. And this project was designed to be expanded up to 500 kW. So it could have future phases as membership desires to do so. But at this point, we just had that initial phase built out. At the time, it was the largest community solar project in Oregon, which was something exciting for us. Our contractor on the project was Sunlight Solar, a local vendor. And that was another important part of the offering. We wanted to focus on local installers, local vendors, and that also came to fruition with the equipment we purchased too. Just kind of a high level, and I'll go through this pretty quick. The panels themselves were manufactured by Solar World in Portland. The racks were designed and built by Sunmoto in Vancouver, and then our inverters were by SMA America. Our panels and the size of it's approximately 1.3 acres, and the full build out would be 2.9 acres if we went to that 500 kW capacity. So regarding production from that, this roughly 704 panels that we have, those are each 285 watt panels. annual production for 2021, just to kind of paint the picture, a little over 300,000 kilowatt hours annually. Peak monthly, about 35,000 in the summer last year, and then the trough last year for 2021 was about 12,000. To put some context around this, it's enough power to power about 19 CEC average residential homes. So not a large project, but definitely something that we were excited to be able to offer. The cost breakdown for us, overall construction costs were around 700,000. We were able to achieve some grant funding through the Oregon Department of Energy Renewable Energy Development Grant, about 129,000. The Bonneville Environmental Foundation, about 50,000, and the USDA grant of about 87,000. So total grants paid for about a third of the project, which was great. The net costs a little less than 500,000. And for participation, we went kind of two methodologies, or that was the process. We wanted to offer this shared solar, so a subscription-based model. Members could purchase whole panel, half, or quarter, or any increment. So we have some members that just purchased a quarter panel, and then we have other members that have up to 24 panels, and even some members that have net metering on their homes and have shared solar subscriptions. The other option is essentially just to participate in our Green Power program, which is an additional surcharge on the KWH each month. And those funds helped fund the remainder of the balance on the shared solar build out, essentially. So about 40% of the system was sold to individual users or subscription, essentially, and then about 60% was funded through Green Power. I would say one of the biggest things that, kind of pain points or challenges that we realized being first in this space, there were a couple logistical issues with kind of working out the on-bill credits and things like that. Since then, it's become a lot easier. That was definitely a little bit of a challenge, just getting kind of the logistical back end set up. But the other thing that we learned when we rolled out this program, we didn't have all of the grant funding. And so the initial per panel price was extremely high, right? Because it was just a representation of that cost per panel. So our initial panel prices were basically about $1,100 for a full panel. Now, after we had achieved that grant funding, those buy downs, got it down to a little less than $600 per panel, a much better, I guess a much better price from a economic standpoint and the payback that individual would be able to achieve. But that was definitely a hurdle for us and a learning lesson. If we were to do it again, all grant funding, we would want to make sure that was achieved prior to deployment of the program. Yes, that was, I see Diane Hinkles, we did receive USDA REAP grant for the project. Yeah, to answer your question. So regarding participation at the end of promotion, we basically did 3 years of sales. We did a 20-year subscription lease, and that is, with those 3 years of sales, we backed the lease down each year. So we wanted all of the subscriptions to end on the same date. So we started from day one, they got a 20-year. After we rolled into that second year, they got a 19-year, and third year, an 18-year subscription, essentially. And we adjusted the costs appropriately and accordingly. And then there was some proration in there, depending on when they signed up, essentially. At the end of that period, we had 114 participating members with approximately 265 panels purchased. And we've got about 800 members that are currently participating in our Green Power program, essentially. So just kind of in summary, and I'll actually take a couple of these questions as I'm going. So yeah, that we are in Redmond, Oregon. We serve Redmond. We serve quite a bit of Central Oregon, 5,300 square miles, but we do share territory with Pacific Power. I wouldn't say share, but we border territory with Pacific Power. So we've got designated areas, but we are kind of intermixed throughout Central Oregon. To kind of go back to the summary, the biggest challenge is really that cost to entry that we found. The members wanted to do this, they wanted to participate, but it was a challenge for that payback. Now, after we received the grant funding, obviously that payback got better, but it was still approximately about a 14, 15-year payback for the individual on a 20-year subscription. You know, that is a direct reflection of how low our rates are, right? And as a not-for-profit, consumer-owned utility, that's something we hang our hats on, is extremely low rates. It just doesn't, you know, play nicely with that payback equation. So it's still a value. Still have members that were interested, but that is definitely a barrier to entry. One of the things I wanted to do is, and I didn't have time to do it, and I apologize, but I think I will still follow up on it. I was curious to see how those costs, our costs we paid back then, what the cost for the exact same project would be right now, given, you know, the probably 30%, I would say, on average reduction in, you know, cost of solar. So I'd be interesting to kind of run that equation, and I will kind of work through that and bring it back to the group just to see how much it would cost in today's dollar. Now, obviously, inflation may play a little factor in that too, but it'd be interesting to see that. The other thing that I do want to highlight, one of the big positives, obviously, we built this project out in response to members. It's a great offering. We always want to provide flexibility, and that's what this does and did. The other thing that I found is really, I guess, encouraging is members that we've seen go off lines with CEC have donated their panels to other individuals or other organizations to be able to have that panel, which is really great to see and kind of fits with everything we try to do here at Central Electric Cooperative.
Great. Thanks so much, Ryan. We really appreciate you sharing. We did have some people had issues hearing. I was lucky and I could turn up my volume enough that I could, but if you have any like links to more information or any materials you can send that we can get around to the folks that were having trouble hearing, that'd be awesome.
Yeah.
We really appreciate the perspective.
Absolutely. We've got some great information on our website. So why don't I put both those links in the chat?
Perfect.
Yeah, sounds good.
Thanks so much, Ryan.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. And yeah, that was a great project for CEC to kind of blaze a trail in Central Oregon with community solar. So appreciate that. And I didn't fully set the stage for these discussions, but we've got 7 speakers, and we would like to keep each presentation to about the length that Ryan just gave us, about 10 minutes each, to try to stay on schedule. You know, share all the information, but try to keep the discussions on point. And I think we're on good track for our discussion. And Les, I think we might go to you next if you're ready to go, because I know you have some time constraints, and that will give us the opportunity for all questions to be fielded before you need to bail out. So Les Perkins with, well, I'll let you do your own introduction, Les.
Hey, is my sound okay?
Sounds great.
Great. So I'm Les Perkins. I manage Farmers Irrigation District located in the Hood River Valley. I'm going to talk a little bit about our project. I have Zach Dehart, who is our plant operator, who is going to take a little bit of the time just to talk about the practicalities and challenges of operating a system. So like I said, we're an irrigation district in the Hood River Valley. We serve about 6,000 acres of farmland. We have an in-conduit system. So it's an in-conduit hydropower system. It's made up of 2 powerhouses. So we have a 1.8 megawatt Pelton, which has about 700 feet of head on it and flows about 35 CFS at maximum capacity. And then we have a 2.6 megawatt Turgo unit, which has about 300 feet of head on it and flows up to 108 cubic feet per second. So it's a total capacity of about 4.4 megawatts. And annually, we produce anywhere between 21 and 25 million kilowatt hours. Our production peaks from January to about April. We're producing about 4.2 megawatts right now. And then our lowest production is in August. And this is based on irrigation. So we start serving irrigation water in the middle of April and end irrigation deliveries the last day of September. So when we're delivering irrigation water, we have less flow going to the turbines. We are low impact hydro certified and also Oregon RPS and CEC certified. So we sell RECs. Actually, the last several years we've sold to the city of Pasadena in California. We have a power purchase agreement with PacifiCorp, which expires in December of 2025, which is coming right up. And we are directly connected to PacifiCorp's system at our switchyard at our powerhouse number 2. So a little bit of history, our plants were installed in the mid-1980s. One was installed in 1985 and the second unit was installed in 1987. Those projects were financed with loans, were repaid over 20 years. The original loans, I actually, it was far enough back that I don't remember who they were financed through. I know that there was some initial discussion with Odo, and I think it was the SELP loan program at the time, but I know the district ended up funding through a different government loan program, but they were paid off long ago. Our upgrades to our system, we've actually financed through the Clean Water State Revolving Loan Fund, which is a low interest loan fund. You have to have an environmental benefit tied to your project. Some of the projects we recently did in terms of upgrades, we repowered one of our powerhouses in 2015, replaced 2 Francis units with a single Turgo, put in new controls, new main unit breaker, and a new high pressure unit, which is what controls the controls on the powerhouse. And then we put in new controls at our other powerhouse in 2017, and basically to match our other powerhouse. So digital controls on both units, all modernized. And that was all funded through Clean Water State Revolving Loan Fund. We also replaced our transformer and our switchyard at the same time. So on the benefit side, for our community, well, for the district, so the units produce revenue for us, and currently it's about 2/3 of our revenue stream, so just under $2 million annually into our district. What we've done with that funding over the years is we've basically improved our irrigation system. So we put about $60 million into system improvements, primarily in the form of piping. So our district, when these units first went in, was almost 100% open ditch, and open ditches inherently lose a lot of water through seepage. We'd have canal failures, evaporation. So we would lose up to half of our water in delivery. So over the last 35 years, we've piped almost everything. We have 2.5 miles open canal left, which we hope to finish and closing in the next 3 years. So we've become one of the most efficient irrigation districts in the state of Oregon. So just about every drop that we divert either goes to the powerhouse or ends up on crops. We put in about 70 miles of pipe in that time period. We also have fully pressurized our delivery system, which means that we have just a few growers left that actually have pumps. But in the process of putting our system in and modernizing, we've taken over 1,400 pumps offline, which is a huge energy savings. We now require about half as much water to serve our nearly 6,000 acres of farmland as we did when we first started this project. We also produce about 8% of Hood River County's annual power consumption, which could be used for resilience in the future. We've done some analysis on creating a microgrid with battery storage. We've looked at being able to black start our plants and route power to specific critical infrastructure. There's no real means to pay for that right now, but we're thinking that that is likely in the future going to be another potential value and revenue source. And then we also provide voltage regulation and stabilization within PacifiCorp's local system. Some major challenges from a high level, I'll let Zach talk about more of the operational side. Market access, for our projects, we're an established qualified facility under PURPA, which means that it's a little easier for us to get a contract. But at new projects, that's definitely a barrier, and pricing is one of the big barriers for new projects trying to come online. Climate change, we're a run-of-river system, so we don't have storage in our system for our hydro facility. So as we see flows change and seasonality of flows change, snowpack change that impacts our operations and our annual generation. And then water quality. We're on a glacially fed system. The Hood River is really silty late in the season, and we have debris flows and all kinds of issues, which is challenging. And obviously, when you're running that water through turbines, that can create a lot of challenges. So I'm going to hand it over to Zach, and Zach can talk a little bit just on the operational side.
Hey, how's it going? So as far as the challenges for operating a system such as this, the largest challenge that I would say that we have is environmental, meaning, as we are run a river, sediment is a problem, flashy creeks, things of that nature. It just brings in a lot of debris. We do have a lot and an ever expanding telemetry system. It's radio communications all over the hillsides and monitoring our primary diversions. The challenges that come along with that, as I said, environmental, during the winter months when irrigation is non-existent, because people don't need it, that is our hydro season. And coming along with that, we need to be able to monitor all of our, as Les said, the 70 miles of pipe that we have in the ground. Open ditches were great because you could actually see where the water was, how far down your canals they were, if there were any leaks in the system, how your diversions were operating, things like that. As we have enclosed things, we've had to put in flow meters and just different monitoring points. Many of them are up in very remote locations. So the radio system that we have been installing over the last couple of years requires power, obviously. So we put in a few solar sites, but as you are taking water out of creeks and the bottoms of valleys, solar is not always the most efficient option because the sun likes to be on the hilltops, not in the valleys. So getting power and storing power to those remote sites to be able to maintain our communication system is probably one of the greatest challenges that we're facing right now. As far as the power plants, with the upgrades in place and the modern technology, it's fantastic. The daily checks take about, I'd say, a half hour each plant, and a lot of that's just cleaning, making sure that the digital controls and the main unit breakers are dusted and there's no critters. We've had a couple of squirrels that have gotten into the power plants and caused some issues in the past, so I've got rat traps in place now. But for the most part, the power plants are you start them up and you can pretty much walk away. It's a fantastic system, very efficient. So yeah, environmental challenges are our greatest obstacle right now. Mother Nature certainly likes to keep us on our toes. So if there's any questions or anything else in particular that you guys would like to know, you can contact us and I'd be more than happy to even give you guys a tour of our system. So.
And I'll throw both of our contact information into the chat.
All righty, thank you. And in listening to your experience, it ties into one of the questions that we're looking at. Not only, what are the benefits of owning renewables, but kind of what are the obligations? And maintaining systems is one of the obligations of owners, either at the individual level or at a contract level. And something like a hydro system on glacial runoff has its own unique maintenance challenges, but I'm glad to have gotten that perspective because there is this question of benefits and obligations around being an owner and maintaining these systems in an active manner. So thank you for that, and right on time. I think we can move on. And Natalie Rogers, are you ready to present? I would like to hear from Natalie, and then just to tee it up from Eric Anderson with Pacific Power, and then we'll move on to the community solar folks.
Hi, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. My name's Natalie. I am the Climate and Natural Resources Manager for the city of Milwaukee. Milwaukee is, just for folks who might not be aware of our demographics, we're only about 21,000 residents at this point. We're southeast of Portland, a very small kind of almost extension of the feel of Southeast Portland, but Milwaukee is a very cool community, very unique. We do have a climate action plan with pretty aggressive climate goals, but we're a very small, lean, and mean team. So I just wanted to start by chatting about kind of solar ownership in Milwaukee and the opportunities that we do see with it. Of course, for a small community, I work often with community members around just general climate education, renewable energy education. So having, panels and other type of visual demonstrations of renewable energy is extremely beneficial, particularly for raising awareness of kind of renewable energy, and actually shifting perspectives on what it actually looks like. A lot of folks, think that it's a big, tremendous project, and then they see kind of some really sleek panels on some homes, and it's actually very good to change some perspectives on it. We do have solar goals in Milwaukee for rooftop solar, and that's for ownership by residents or businesses. That was 2.2 megawatts by 2021, and we actually met and exceeded that. And I think overall solar ownership, particularly if the city owns it, it's really a great showcase of kind of putting your money where your mouth is, right? We tell folks to go install solar if they can. And so it's always good to have a showcase project where the city is also investing in it. We do have solar panels on our new library. We're looking at options to get solar panels on our public safety building as well from a resiliency perspective. But there are a lot of challenges when it comes to ownership, particularly from the small municipal perspective within investor-owned utility territory. So PGE is our utility. We have a really great relationship with PGE. And there's just kind of barriers to us owning solar, particularly as a small city, small community, small staff. For one thing, it's always a community education perspective on kind of what is the difference between a municipal electric to an IOU territory kind of collaboration between a city and a utility. So, I still vet questions on people thinking that the city is the one providing electricity to their homes. And so it's really good for us to have that clear line in the sand saying, no, we don't actually deal in providing electricity to customers. There's also, when it comes to projects overall, be it sourcing funds, managing the project, if it ended up being kind of a subscriber type relationship, we just don't have the staff resources to really manage that from a small community perspective. I am about now managing, our climate action program probably about at half time. So, 1/2 FTE. We do have a great network of staff here who all kind of contribute towards climate goals, but that work would probably fall in my wheelhouse. And there's just really not a lot of time that I have to invest both in finding financing for projects, and that includes things like green bonds, grants, other more creative financing solutions. That takes time to even just kind of start to investigate those and work them out. So there's a lot of challenges there. There's also, one thing that we have, and it's an interesting, relationship, is essentially working with our local businesses and building owners in Milwaukee, and really making sure, because we have tenants and then there's building owners. So when we kind of are looking at increasing solar ownership, small scale solar ownership of businesses in Milwaukee, often the businesses that are operating out of Milwaukee are not the building owners. And so we kind of have to get in between that relationship. And, there's kind of this work and finessing that needs to happen to be encouraging, but also not approaching the feeling of us requiring business owners to change anything or building owners to change anything. So we've just had some challenges in the past around that. So I would just imagine that would be kind of something that would require a lot of just careful conversations around. Another thing too, from our community perspective, we're a very built out community, and our community has a lot of small buildings. It's not a lot of large industrial buildings. We do have a few industrial kind of large commercial buildings in Milwaukee. And once again, oftentimes those aren't owned by the tenants. But our own, city, we don't own a lot of, our city buildings that are large scale enough to really start thinking about whether or not an investment into a panel size would be worth it for essentially what we're getting out. We looked at some community solar, even hosting community solar sites here in Milwaukee, and we worked with a few organizations to take a look at what buildings the city owned. And really, we just heard that it wouldn't be, I don't want to say cost effective, but it's just not the most bang for our buck. And that's, we see that with a lot of the other buildings around our community, because we also don't have we have pretty restrictive height requirements on our buildings in Milwaukee. We're just starting to get the 4-story buildings. Oftentimes we see 2 stories, which means that there are conflicts between buildings, but then also our community has very robust tree canopy goals. And, I don't like to bring up the whole you can have trees or solar and not both, but that is a challenge as we look at ownership in Milwaukee, particularly when we're encouraging industrial and commercial entities to start planting out tree canopy. Because folks, we do have solar access code. We do have folks who are concerned about if they start putting in panels and say they don't have an expansive rooftop to put in panels, so they're choosing maybe other more creative options. And then we start increasing tree planting requirements. We're gonna be looking at industrial and commercial tree code soon. So it's just, we want to recognize that there are some potential conflicts between the two. And at this time, our community sees tree canopy as being one of the highest priorities that provides the most benefits to all of our community members. And I think overall, though, when we're looking at it from the small community perspective over what it takes to go into small scale renewable ownership, we just have to kind of think about what we're investing in that, both in staff resources and time and city finances, and think, is there something else that we can do that gets more bang for our buck? And right now, I would say we're looking more towards things like electrification and seeking maybe larger utility scale renewable options, just because that takes less staff resources to manage, and it's more of an education and outreach. And it's just something that we're seeing as more feasible for us at this point. We still, of course, support small scale renewables. We'd love to see folks install it, and we want to reduce barriers in order for folks to take advantage of those opportunities. But from the municipal ownership side, there's just the amount of challenges that we have to the opportunities. It's just, we see potentially other projects as being more valuable at this moment.
Great. That's it's really nice to have that municipal perspective. And I think there's a lot of takeaways from what you just shared. The first one that I noticed was just the kind of capacity of staff to manage projects and to manage how the community is able to get into renewables. And as you mentioned, the larger projects kind of have a lower man hour per kilowatt capacity limitation, because we're seeing those capacity limitations. I mean, Milwaukee is really well organized and putting together great projects, but a lot of communities are way more understaffed. and having that ability to support community efforts at the municipal level is something that we would love to see more of. And so, yeah, that's a great perspective. And also the partnership that you described with the utility, that's obviously a key piece. I mean, these are interconnected systems that are tied into the grid. And as we see more and more of these, I think we'll see more and more benefits coming out of them for the community. And obviously the big one in this discussion are the potential resilience benefits. And so the municipal involvement in these projects that can provide some resilience value, I think is something that we'll see more and more of moving forward. So thank you for that. And I think with that, we will move on.
Rob?
Yes.
If Eric is cool with it, and Eric, maybe you can let us know if you are. We have a couple of presenters, Carly and Hunter, that aren't on the work group that are here to present, and they have an obligation at 10:30. So they were hoping that maybe they could go next, if that's okay with Eric.
That is perfectly fine.
Thanks, Eric. We appreciate you. Carly and Hunter can go next.
Great. Thank you all. Yeah, I guess my name is Hunter Strader, and here with my colleague Carly Sellers. We work with Oregon Shines, which is a community solar subscriber acquisition and management company, which basically provides the connection of installed solar project to energy users that buy electricity from the utility, such as Portland General Electric or Pacific Power. Idaho Power is also involved in this program. And I guess I wear a couple hats, and what we like to do today is, I think I'll focus on kind of the development and financing aspect of community solar. And then Carly can focus on kind of what's involved in signing folks up to buy power from these projects and the benefits that they receive when they do buy solar energy from these community solar projects. And I think that's how we'll kind of proceed here. So I mentioned I wear a couple hats. So Oregon Shines is one aspect of what I focus on. And then the other aspect is development. I have a company, Green Key Solar, and we're a greenfield development company, primarily focused in Oregon. And so traditionally we would develop QF project, qualified facilities, where the off-taker is, an investor-owned utility such as Portland General Electric. And then as the community solar program came to be, we started developing community solar projects. There's kind of four main aspects when you think about developing a successful, ground-mounted solar project, or what's needed. You need site control, so a land lease or a purchase option with the site to develop on. You need an interconnection agreement with the utility to actually connect your system into the grid. You need a conditional use permit typically, unless if you're doing like a rooftop project, then typically you just need a building and building and electrical permit. But a lot of times when you're developing in like farmland, EFU, or timberland, TBR zoned land, which a lot of these projects are zoned for, you'll need a conditional use permit. And there's certain guidelines that you have to follow to have a successful project being developed there and get a permit. And then the last thing is, who are you selling the power to? So under qualified facilities, you would sell power to utility directly through a PURPA contract or a power purchase agreement. But with community solar, you can sell the power directly to the individuals. And I guess a couple high level points, like when you're developing these projects, and some of the challenges that we've incurred. I guess more recently, the state of Oregon a few years ago banned solar development on class 1 and 2 soils. So that really eliminates a lot of the Willamette Valley, and that at least EFU zoned properties. So there's still a lot of capacity on Portland General Electric substations for affordable, relatively affordable, interconnections. And that, you need good grid infrastructure for that. So good heavy conductor 3-phase lines, good, substation capacity, that kind of thing. And a lot of that's found in the Willamette Valley, where there is class 1 and 2 soils. So now that you can't develop on that type of soil classification, that's kind of halted any new development in PGE territory. You can develop on timberlands, TBR zoned property, but a lot of timberlands does not really have heavy conductor 3-phase lines going to it, or nearby substations, or if they do, then most of those sites have been spoken for. So it's pretty limited on development. You could possibly develop on industrial, but the cost of that land is typically pretty high, and a lot of times industrial land, a lot of cities that have industrial land or counties, they've banned solar development on it just because that's not really the intended use for the property. They prefer, manufacturing or some type of other, business there. So develop, and then that leaves like, population centers where there is grid infrastructure, where you can maybe do like rooftop projects. But the challenge with rooftop projects, and the reason why ground mount is so much more appealing, is because of the scale and the cost of install. So installing a ground mount system last year, before all the solar module chaos, you could get modules at low 30 cents a watt. Now with the Department of Commerce anti-dumping tariff investigation, modules are more like 53 cents a watt or higher. So it's gone up. It's almost doubled in cost. So anyway, I guess prior to the DOC investigation, the cost of a ground mount system is about $1 a watt or $1.15 a watt, depending if you're doing fixed tilt or trackers. But a rooftop system can be anywhere like $1.50 to north of $2 a watt, depending on it. So it's quite a bit of difference in terms of cost of install. And so that, with community solar, there's a bill credit rate, and the value doesn't change regardless if you're installing on a roof or installing on the ground. So there's really a fixed kind of income number that you're sort of getting for every kilowatt hour that you're generating. So the cost of the install is really important. The other thing is, I guess, from a financing standpoint, depending, like when you finance a project, a lot of anyway, when you take a project or a portfolio of projects out to market, the financing of those portfolios depends on the size of your portfolio and who you can really be talking to. And so a lot of like rooftop projects, they're relatively small projects, so that definitely limits your financing, I guess, outlets and who you can speak with. So there are financing challenges, the smaller kind of scale that you go to. But I think I'm about up on my portion of this, and wanted to turn it over to Carly to kind of discuss the offtake components, and what community solar means for the folks that are actually buying the power from it. So yeah, Carly, if you want to take it away, and I'm happy to answer questions as well afterward.
Sounds good. Thank you, Hunter. Hopefully everyone can hear me. Hi, everyone. I'm Carly. I work with Oregon Shines as well. But like Hunter mentioned, I kind of work more in the capacity of actually recruiting and connecting subscribers to our community solar projects that we represent, doing outreach, education to subscribers, and then also managing the ongoing relationships with subscribers throughout their participation in the Oregon Community Solar Program. So I guess from my perspective, I've been working for Oregon Shines for about 2 years, and we've represented, I think, 15 community solar projects that we've subscribed during the first tier of the Oregon Community Solar Program. So we have had quite a bit of involvement in the community with discussing community solar with subscribers, actually getting subscribers to sign on to these projects. And there have definitely been some challenges with that, but as you all probably know, community solar has a lot of wonderful benefits for both the community and for subscribers. So that's kind of the perspective that I wanted to bring today. First, just kind of high level benefits of community solar projects to our community as a whole. Hunter mentioned a lot of these community solar projects are, built on, or are ground mounted systems built on land. So where does that land come from? A lot of these community solar projects bring consistent revenue to landowners here in Oregon that are leasing their land for the community solar projects to be built. So that kind of brings them, revenue for the entire life of the solar project, which is kind of one of those hidden benefits of community solar. And it also obviously brings a revenue stream for the local solar development companies here that are developing the community solar projects, and then other companies such as solar construction companies, maintenance companies, things like that. So there's a greater benefit here in our community with community solar projects aside from subscribers. But for subscribers to community solar projects, there's a whole slew of benefits that they're getting from participating. I think the most unique thing about community solar and what we've kind of gathered from subscribers over the past couple of years is that the kind of number one benefit from community solar is that it's a tangible source of clean energy for these subscribers. So you can actually get in your car, drive to a community solar project that you're subscribing to, and point to it and say, that's where I'm buying my clean energy from, and my subscription has actually allowed that community solar project to come to fruition, which kind of brings us to the next really important benefit of community solar.
Carly, as you get into that benefit, you guys are a couple minutes over, and I know we have a couple more talking about community solar too. So you go ahead. I'm gonna ask our community solar friends that are following to listen carefully and see if they can sort of taper down their remarks so that we're not hearing the same points from them too about the benefits of community solar that you're sharing here. So thank you, and I'll probably give you another minute or so and then come back. If
Gotcha. Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah, sorry about that. We can wrap up.
No, it's great. Good stuff. Thank you.
But yeah, there's a couple of other benefits as well. So one of the main ones, and it's a little bit unique to Oregon, is that subscribers maintain ownership of the renewable energy certificates produced by their subscription, which has been a big plus for a lot of our subscribers, since this isn't necessarily how it works in other community solar projects in other states. So yeah, I can wrap it up there. I think a lot of people on this call probably know how community solar works. Customers get savings on their bill, which is great. It's a incentive program instead of having to pay a premium for renewable energy. And yeah, it expands access to solar for many people. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Carly and Hunter. That was a really good introduction into community solar. And like Christy said, we are trying to get all of these presentations wrapped up in the next 20 minutes. And so we're going to move on to Eric, who's going to share some information from the investor-owned utility perspective. And then we'll take the rest of
before Hunter and Carly leave, there's a question for them in the chat. If one of them, it was for Hunter, if he can take that question before he runs off.
Yes, I tried
just take it in the chat.
Responding there, but I hit enter too soon. In short, as far as I know, no, the rules do not allow incorporation of agrivoltaics or that kind of thing. So for example, there was a solar developer that also had a bee farm, and they developed like a 10 megawatt project, but also it was a bee farm, and they had pollinators and that kind of thing. And that did go through, but that was before this type of restriction. So as far as I know, you can't ask for any kind of exemption, even if it's for agrivoltaics. Like one of our projects, for example, we have sheep kind of keeping the grass intact. And that, if you were to develop a project right now and say, hey, we're grazing sheep on it, and this is a dual use property, it's not just for solar, it's also for sheep. I don't think, as far as I know, that would fly, unfortunately. But I wish that was the case. Yeah.
Thanks, Hunter. Take care, and thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you.
And now to Eric.
Hi. Yeah, Rob, I don't know if we need, oh, you pulled it up, thanks. We can go to the next slide. So my name's Eric Anderson. I work for Pacific Power. I'm the strategic manager for renewable energy. So I just wanted to give, or I was asked to give a little just overview of what it might mean for utilities to participate in the ownership of or to own small scale renewable resources, and what the opportunities are for us to move into that space. Thought it would be good just for some of you, this is going to be overly simplistic. For some of you, you may not have heard these terms, but when utilities evaluate their participation or their investments, these are sort of like the key terms and sort of the key processes at the highest level. So basically, when we go in to build something, we build a new asset, and it's sort of that investment is supposed to benefit most, the ratepayers generally, as a group. And to do that, we typically leverage shareholder funding, or perhaps loans based on our equity mix. So we go out, leverage shareholder funding at the highest level. We then build the project. The commission then reviews the project to make sure that that it complies with sort of our requirements for when we make investments, and that we're allowed to recover those funds from ratepayers. Then when we recover those funds, we basically get our money back that we invested, and we make a profit at a predetermined rate that the commission has established for what amount we make for investments. The typical criteria that the commission uses at the highest level for determining if we deserve basically that return on investment is that project used and useful. With a generating resource, that's typically pretty easy to prove once it's up and running and actually producing energy. It's pretty much used and useful. But a bigger one for this discussion was that investment prudent? Was that the best use of ratepayer funding? Or maybe not the best use, but at least a good use of ratepayer funding. And usually for a lot of different technologies, how that is evaluated, was it cost effective? Did it make sense to make that investment as compared to some other investment? This is all then sort of evaluated against a portfolio from our planning process, where we sort of determine what our least cost and least risk options are for making these investments. Just to level set, we're not talking about power purchase agreements here or long-term investments, because utilities don't lay out any capital and thus don't make a return on investment for power purchase agreements. Those costs are just passed through to customers directly. So what we're just talking about is something where the utility really goes out, lays out funds, and put steel in the ground. That's where utilities make their profit, and sort of the world that we're talking about here. So here's some potential. You can go to the next slide, Rob. When I was thinking about where are potential for utility ownership in this space, there are a few opportunities out there where where utility capital could really be used to leverage and sort of bring down costs for ratepayers. One that gets a lot of attention right now is sort of the non-wires alternative solution, which is basically leveraging locally sited generation, typically paired with storage, to either replace or defer other larger scale investments. So if we can, typically that's like, oh, we have load growth in an area, we're going to need to build a new substation. So that's a very expensive investment. So if we go in and use, storage or solar on the side, we can defer that investment for 8 to 10 years and prevent having to do that upgrade. We have a good example ourselves in our Utah service territory where we were having some transmission voltage issues at peak times. And so rather than do a transmission upgrade, which is a really expensive project, we cited a 650 kilowatt solar system and a relatively large but not huge battery at our substation at a transmission substation, which allowed us to defer that huge investment. Hopefully, over time, it may allow us to just not have to do that big investment, but at least we're going to get years where we don't have to move that forward. So we get to sort of delay that in the capital planning, and that delay is really worth it. The trick here is those opportunities aren't everywhere. You really need to make it worthwhile, because solar and storage is a relatively expensive asset. So small upgrades, the deferred amount the value of that. It's not every opportunity or every capital project that installing solar or installing storage makes financial sense. So the challenge is just finding those locations, but they're out there. For example, we have this Panguitch project, Puget Sound Energy, the obvious example is Bainbridge Island, where they needed another transmission line run under the water, and instead they put a large battery and solar at that location to not have to do that transmission line. So there are opportunities like that where strategic utility funding can at specific locations can actually benefit the system as a whole, reduce costs for all customers, and facilitate and get more sort of local generation. So let's go to the next slide. Oh wow, that's not how it looks on my screen. But okay, let's just pretend there's a little box that says microgrid and resiliency in the corner. This is another space. This is another space where utility participation and to some degree ownership could help facilitate sort of resiliency command. So this is microgrid development. HB 2021 specifically states that in our clean energy plans, we will need to begin to evaluate how localized resiliency is factored into our long-term energy planning. So there is opportunity there for us to participate in projects, but it's unclear what that participation will look like at this point. I mean, there's the two little pictures here is, typically when you envision resiliency, I always thought of like the fire station, where it makes sense for ratepayers to spend money to increase the local resiliency of that one metered location there. And by encouraging resiliency and keeping that facility up and running, you benefit basically, ratepayers in general. The trick there is expanding that model to larger investments and to larger locations. When does it make sense for a utility to spend all ratepayer funds to help either individual customers or dedicated communities or small subsets of communities with relatively large investments which really only help a certain subset? So I think there's going to be a lot of work in that space right now about how we evaluate utility investments which only help sort of a small subset of customers, with their resiliency for large-term outages, but yet justify that, charging that and spreading that cost over quite the whole customer base. But even in this situation, you know, this is a one-line diagram from one of the most largest and most innovative microgrid projects that I have witnessed. It's actually not in our service territory; it's in Northern California. But this is the Redwood Coast Airport, and it's, you know, multiple megawatts worth of solar, multiple megawatts worth of storage, but the utility investment in these situations is still relatively minor. There's the microgrid controller system and some work on the lines, but the generation assets and the storage assets are still owned by the local community. So it is a place where we can find those partnerships, but they're still expensive because generation and storage is an expensive asset. And you know, you still got to find that right location where you can isolate that community or isolate that segment of a circuit to actually increase the resiliency and let it island separately. So that's another place where we could participate in investment and encouraging these goals. And then the last one, you can go to the last slide.
And Eric, you're a little over time, so if you want to just quickly share this one, that would be great. Thank you.
This is super easy. We have a path directed by HB 2021 to transition to non-emitting resources. You know, we have our IRP, which, you know, which shows us not quite getting there. We need to be at 100% by 2040, and we were in 2021 before HB 2021. Only going to get to 85% non-emitting resources. So there is a margin there. We need to fill it. The trick is going to be, do we do that with large projects? We are directed to do it with at least 10% small projects. But do we fill that space with utility investment, or do we leave that space open for power producers and communities to fill that margin there and help us get to the 10% small scale renewables? So that's about it. Happy to answer questions.
Thanks, Eric. We're going to have a Q&A session after our next presenter, but there is a question Angela Crowley-Cook had for you in the chat, and a member of our team started to answer that, but it'd be great if you could take a look in the chat. You don't need to answer verbally, and we'll move on to our next presenter. Thanks,
Perfect.
Eric.
Thank you, Eric. Really good points there. And for me, a couple of the big takeaways are, one, when investor-owned utilities go into ownership of these assets, that there is a whole regulatory process involved with the evaluation of the cost benefit of those funds. And so that's an additional layer of complexity that maybe we don't see on some of the other projects. But the two value streams that were really highlighted, one, the ability to defer investments in utility and transmission infrastructure. That was a much larger project than 20 megawatts that he shared in Utah, but perhaps aggregated small scale projects can help to defer those investments, strategically placed projects. And then about the community resilience benefits, I mean, we're hearing more and more about those. And so that was a very welcome point where these distributed smaller scale projects, even if they're not deferring investments for utility upgrades, they're still providing very valuable assets in a community. So with that, I think we will move on to our last group of speakers to continue the discussion on community solar projects. And we'll give a few minutes of extra time since we're running a little bit late and we've been handling some questions as we go. But Dan Orzak and Ray Sanchez, maybe we can have you guys kind of share the stage. I think I have Ray's slides keyed up first. Oh no, actually I have yours, Dan. And so in as much as we've already covered the content, maybe we can breeze through some of the overview of community solar and get to some of the more specific points that you would like to make around ownership. And sorry to constrain the time like this.
No problem. Understood, Rob. Ray is stuck on an airplane at this moment, so I'm going to do both. I'm not going to do justice to Ray's presentation, but I will do both ours, the Oregon Clean Power Co-ops, and Solarize Rogue. So we are a co-op. So first of all, I'm Dan Warzek. I'm the general manager of Oregon Clean Power. We are a co-op. We're kind of an unusual organization, unusual for a co-op, that is. Next slide. I'm going to try to whip through these kind of quickly. So we were formed to do two things. So our mission, if you will, is to increase the amount of renewable energy in Oregon. And the way we do that is by allowing people to invest in renewable energy projects in their community. You'll notice that we're not the Oregon Solar Co-op. We can do microhydro projects, small wind projects, biogas digesters. We keep looking for the right project to do in those arenas, but my background is solar, and that's what we've done today. So co-ops, next slide, please. Co-ops are what I call the hidden business model. We all deal with them probably on a daily basis and probably don't even realize it. There are 29,000 co-ops in the US. There are multi-billion-dollar co-ops, many of them around the world. Co-op movement started among the weavers in England when they grouped together to buy food for their families in the 1860s. We're unusual, as I mentioned, because what we do as a co-op, our members don't buy things or sell things, they invest. So to understand what we do, you have to consider a little bit of history and securities laws. So next slide. So this is a fish, of course, not just any fish, it's a herring. And it's not just any herring, it's a red herring. So if you're not an investment banker or a venture capitalist, you probably don't run into these, but next slide, Rob. Red herring, of course, is another name for an offering memorandum or prospectus. And if you want to, say, build a solar project or any other investment for that matter, you need one of these things. And to get one will set you back probably $50,000 or more. So this is one of the hurdles that small community-owned projects of any sort, not just solar projects, face. And it comes out of the blue sky laws in the 1930s, right, which Congress passed to protect grandma from investing in swampland in Florida or desert land in the middle of Arizona. And those were absolutely legitimate laws at that time. But today, in the era of the internet and high-speed travel, they're not relevant anymore, not as relevant. And of course, they're being slowly replaced. So there's a whole movement started in the last decade or two, various names for it, locavesting, invest in Main Street, not Wall Street. A lot of it started with what's called the slow food movement, local farming. So there's a lot of interactions here. What we did was went to the Oregon legislature and got a securities exemption, which allows us to sell stock, shares of stock in local solar projects. And it's limited to Oregon residents, which means we can take advantage of, we don't have to register with the US SEC. We only have to register as an Oregon securities. So let me show you some examples of what we've done to date. We have focused on community organizations. Sorry, next slide, please. And those include schools. I think we're up to our 6th school with the Corvallis School District. I'm not going to talk about resiliency, but the schools at the coast there are among about a dozen of our projects, roughly, that have batteries. Next slide. I'm going to go quickly here, Rob. So local governments. Next slide. Nonprofits. And next slide. Churches and faith communities. And next slide. So we've just started working with businesses as well. So this is our first business, Block 15 Brewing Company in Corvallis. And interestingly, from our perspective, churches and breweries and wineries are very similar, which when we started thinking about it, sort of surprised us. But they both have a a stakeholder community that's really interested in them. So churches obviously have members. Most of the churches we've done to date, maybe all of them, the financing has all come entirely from the members, the congregation members. When we did Block 15, the investment came from fans of their beer, employees, members of the family, and just people, for example, the mayor of Corvallis, who wanted to support local businesses as a private individual, of course. All right, next slide. So how does it work? You have to be, as I mentioned, you have to be an Oregon resident, and then you can join the co-op, and that lets you invest in projects. And a lot of our members join to invest in one project, and then they find themselves investing in multiple projects. We take those funds and we aggregate them. We call that crowd vesting. So people are familiar probably with crowdfunding, which is donations. This is not a donation, it's an investment. So we aggregate those funds and we use those to build a solar project, and that generates a source of revenue. For the projects you've seen, which are not community solar projects, those savings come from the energy savings, and then that provides a source of revenue to pay back the community members who invested. Next slide. For the individual members' from the individual members' point of view, minimum investment is $1,000. We pay back annually over 10 to 12 years, and we started paying 2% APR, and lately have been paying 4% APR. Next slide. So this is the Oregon Shakespeare Festival production building and talent. You're going to see this again. So we're a little out of order here. On the lower left is a community solar project that I'm going to talk about in the Solarize Rogue presentation. On the right are solar panels that we finance this way with community investment. Neither of these solar projects are owned by the Oregon Shakespeare Festival. The one on the left, community solar project, is an owner model community solar project, which I'll talk about in a moment. And then the co-op owns the solar panels on the right, and we use a PPA to sell that power to the Oregon Shakespeare Festival. Next slide. So just an example of what that might look like. This is another project that I picked somewhat at random. You can see the orange slice there is the community investors. The blue is Energy Trust. And of course, those numbers have gone down. This project is a couple of years back. The yellow is donations from community members. That was actually spearheaded by the students at Corvallis High School. And then the gray there is an individual who's taking the tax credits and investing in the project. So this is a very common power purchase agreement to enable tax equity investments, a very common arrangement in the solar world. What we've done is downsize it from what it's usually used for to the community scale. So we've used this for projects as small as 50 kW. All right, last thing I want to talk about is community solar. So we are not limited to doing net metered projects, right, like I've showed you. With this investment mechanism, we can invest in any sort of renewable energy project, including community solar. And we are our first project. Well, actually, we have a different focus than the solar developers like Green Key that are doing community solar projects. We only do projects that have some other social aspect to them, social benefit. So we heard some about the difficulties of siting solar projects, and I cannot overemphasize the importance of that to the state of Oregon in achieving our climate goals. And we're tackling that in various ways. So one of the things we're doing is doing 2 separate community solar projects in Southern Oregon with irrigation districts. And one of them, we hope, will be the first floating solar project in Oregon. So floating solar is increasingly common around the world. This is a large project somewhere in Asia, I think. Ours won't be that big, but it's one of the things we're working on. And then next slide.
Dan, we're over time. It's been about 12 minutes now. And I know we're also supposed to cover Ray. So, and Ray had a flight delay, right? So he's not here.
Yeah.
So I'm not super sure how we should proceed here, but I just wanted to put a flag in there that.
Yeah, thanks. This is my last slide. Oh, I have two more real quick, and then I'll jump to Ray's presentation. So, so we're doing, we're citing. You can go to the next slide, Rob. We're working on agrivoltaics that we heard mentioned. This is our first agrivoltaics project, just off I-5 south of Wilsonville at the OSU Extension Farm. So if you want to jump to the Solarize Rogue presentation. Yeah, next slide. So Solarize Rogue is a grassroots based nonprofit based in Talent, Jackson County, just north of Ashland. And next slide. Most community solar projects take a subscription-based approach. Ray really pioneered, so Ray Sanchez Pescador pioneered in Oregon the ownership model. And instead of subscribing, what that looks like is community members put up the money up front and actually legally own the solar panels in a community solar project. So that's a lot cheaper, obviously, to build a large project than putting solar on your own house, up to 75%. And because they legally own it, they get the investment tax credit, the ITC. And from the homeowner's point of view, what it looks like is you can put solar panels up on the roof of your house. And let's say that costs you $15,000. Or you can put the solar panels in a community solar array, and that might cost you half of that, let's say. And you still legally own them, and you can do it if you can't put solar on your own roof because you have trees, or you rent. Next slide. So there you see the Shakespeare Festival building. Solarize Rogue started out by asking community members who was interested. They had, the minimum size project for community solar is 25 kW. The initial goal was to do 60 kW, and the project as built was 141 kW. Next slide. Let's skip this. Except the only thing I'll mention there is the payback period is 11 years. For our other projects, the next project we're hoping to do with Solarize Rogue will be larger. We expect the payback project will be 8 to 10 years. So here you see the project. It's the first in many ways. I think Pacific Power would probably agree with us that we're blazing the trail, figuring out how to interconnect 141 kW project in Pacific Power territory as a community solar project. Next slide. Okay, I think that's it. Next slide. Yeah. So that's all we've got, and thank you.
Well done, Dan. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, you brought it home. Thanks, Dan.
Yeah.
So we are a little over schedule. I know that we've had questions coming in throughout the presentations, and so the Q&A that we had built in maybe isn't quite as necessary. And right now it's the only thing between us and a short break. And so I think I would just invite any hand raising that, with immediate questions for our speakers. And if not, we can take a little break and come back and move into the next stage of our workshop here, where we talk about some of our important questions that we're trying to answer. So
I see Oriana has a hand up. I also want to, it's possible that I missed something, but I don't think I did, just raise something from the chat, which was that that James, I think it was asking about the low income element of community solar. And if it already did get covered, that's fine. I just wanted to make sure that he got what he needed, and then we can go to Oriana. James, I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think it's been covered, but I mean, I guess I feel like I know the outline of the requirements of the community solar program and the 10% requirement to have low income subscribers. But I guess I was hoping to get a little bit of context from folks that are developing projects on how those benefits are flowing and yeah, basically how that piece is being implemented. Because that is a unique and I think really important part of the policy that created the program. But I don't know if we have folks. Yeah, I think the folks from Oregon Shines are no longer on. So
I can give you a quick comment on how we're doing that with the Solarized Rogue projects. So there are 16 owners to the Oregon Shakespeare Festival Community Solar Project, and three families that are actually subscribing as low income. So we have both models, and that's the approach we'll use on our next owned or ownership models.
Great.
Alrighty. And Oriana?
I guess my question is similar and perhaps something to keep people on time for a break that we could discuss after, which is it would be helpful to hear from all the speakers how they see their model benefiting low-income and environmental justice communities and where some of the limitations are on that front. And it would be helpful if there are any folks who do work with tribal governments as well to better understand how those projects fit into this particular landscape of different ownership models.
It's a really good point, and I think that we can discuss it some today, but we also have this sort of parking lot for some crossover items. And I think this is one that we can also identify for some in-depth discussion in our workshop where we talk about benefits and how they flow. And I know that the ownership and the benefits have a lot of crossover. So we'll try to tackle that at the ownership level today, and then at the benefits level in a future workshop. But it's certainly one of the key items in this whole discussion is how we get those benefits to flow to some of those individuals and communities that have been kind of left out up until now. So thanks for bringing that up, Oriana. I think maybe we will take our break, and it's 11 o'clock now. So let's return at 11:10, and we will kick off into the next section, and we can continue question and discussions going on within the chat so that we can have a kind of the ability to table some of these topics. So thank you to all of our presenters. That was extremely informative. And I would like to see everybody back at 11:10. Welcome back.
Rob, one thing I want to get to right away, I think you suggested people put their questions in the chat to create sort of like a parking lot while we were on break so we could come back and be ready to talk. And I think that got interpreted as, we'll parking lot it period and move on with the agenda. So I just wanted to make sure folks know we're going to get back to Oriana's question and any questions that came up in the chat between now and then. And it was just meant as a temporary place so we wouldn't lose track of things while we took a 10-minute time away from the conversation.
All right, so I guess that would be a good spot to kick off now, would be to tackle some of those questions. So
yeah, I think Oriana's was verbal, which was like to have the folks that are still on the line that presented the owner perspectives too. And I don't want to, she might want to come back on and ask her question again, but around how that plays in with, well, maybe we just have Oriana come back on and ask her question again so I don't get it wrong.
Thanks, and thanks for that clarification about the parking lot piece. Really appreciate that the primary research questions include low-income and environmental justice community support through this work. And then to that end, it would be great to hear from our presenters who are still present, how their different models of ownership can provide specific benefits for low income and environmental justice communities, which include tribal, rural, coastal, Black, Indigenous, and other people of color communities. And then if we have anyone who has worked on tribal ownership of projects, since we didn't have anyone representing that perspective here, it would be just helpful to hear more about the model as sovereign nations are owning projects and developing projects, and how that is maybe similar or different to some of the other models at play.
Yeah, thank you, Ariana. And I guess I would welcome any of our speakers who can help answer that question to go ahead and
Rob,
chime
can
in.
you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, hopefully this audio is a little better. I switched over to the headset. Okay. So
It is.
one of the things that Central Electric did for our shared solar program to kind of address equitability and access for income qualified or low income individuals was we had to kind of be a little creative because this is a voluntary program, right? And it's something that members could participate in voluntarily, but we didn't want to negatively impact those non-participating members. So what we did was we appealed to members through our marketing to basically allow them to fund panels that would be then donated, or whether they wanted to donate those to individuals or to organizations. Those were both options that we took. So also, they could do that up front, and then when they potentially went off lines was to donate those panels to individuals or organizations. And that was kind of our approach to be able to make it so it was still equitable from both sides of the coin, but still trying to appeal to access for those individuals that wouldn't be able to potentially purchase on their own. And it was actually rather successful. So
Thank you, Ryan.
Yep.
Any other thoughts on Oriana's question?
Sorry, this is Nikita. I had a follow-up for Ryan. Is that okay?
Sure.
Yeah, for those donated panels, was that I mean, you said it was for individuals or organizations. Was there like some methodology to like target what kinds of individuals and organizations would get panels donated to them? Was it like specifically low-income folks, or yeah, just wanted to hear more about that.
Yeah, you bet. So we gave the individuals an opportunity to say who they wanted to donate them to, essentially, whether it be an individual or organization. If they didn't have someone in mind, we run a really successful member-driven program called Project Helping Hand. It's essentially our version of a roundup program. Members can round up their bills. They can also donate large sums of money. It doesn't have to just be that small roundup. And so through that, we've got kind of a great list of individuals that are in need or maybe recurring members of that. And so that was a way for us to kind of determine individuals that could really benefit from kind of a recurring opportunity like this that you would get an on bill monthly credit, essentially. But ultimately, it was the individual member who donated, their decision and their opportunity. We just kind of helped guide them through that. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, thank you.
You bet.
We'll go to Maggie and then Diane.
Yeah, thank you. Apologies for missing the first meeting. I found out about the working group recently. My name's Maggie Talmadge. I work with a company. I'm a citizen of the Cherokee Nation, so not an Oregon tribe. Can't speak from from a governmental perspective or Oregon tribal perspective. I currently work with Navajo Power, which is a public benefit corporation. It's not affiliated with the Navajo Nation. It is Native owned, mostly Navajo owned, and we develop utility scale solar and wind and battery storage on tribal lands, and are getting into microgrids and other needs for tribes. I sent around to Christine, I believe she'll be sending it around, a lot of regulatory to the guidebook authored by the Midwest Tribal Energy Resource Association and NREL. about regulatory challenges and potential solutions for tribal solar development. So stemming from just participation in energy policy to developing microgrids to utility scale solar. And I think a couple of the highlights that have been that I hear and I am facing are one, a disconnect between the Department of Revenue and Department of Energy, particularly as it relates to double taxation for property taxes. That has been a really big deal for our communities, both on a small scale as well as a large scale, and is continually making. I mean, we're having to create pilots in order to make programs or the financing of the projects actually feasible. I think some other factors are, tribes are served by often numerous co-ops or numerous utilities that may not be under state ODO's in the PUC's jurisdiction. So that can complicate it for both tribes as well as developers that want to work with tribes. I think another big thing is, as many people are aware, tribes are tax exempt, so need to utilize additional parties if with tax appetites and tax burdens to utilize tax credits. However, what we find now with a lot of loan guarantees, for example, the Tribal Energy Loan Guarantee Program through the U.S. Department of Energy, is those models, those loan guarantees do not work in a traditional project finance model. Often those loan guarantees, the federal government, or I'm unaware of Oregon's structure, required to be first in the capital stack, which does not work when you're working with other debt lenders and tax equity investors. So those are a few of the barriers, but I really encourage you to take a look through the guidebook that Christy will be sending out.
Great. Thanks, Maggie. I'll make sure to get that around to the group. Also, I just want to answer a question that came up in the chat and that I think is really apropos to what Maggie said. And by the way, thanks so much for also sharing that perspective, really helpful. I want folks to know that the agency reached out to all 9 of the federally recognized tribes regarding serving on this particular work group. The way that we do that is formal letters. That's like how natural resource agencies communicate with tribes. We also go to culture cluster meetings, which I think happen monthly pretty frequently, where we've been bringing this up again and again as something we've wanted to find someone to serve on. We've also had follow-up meetings with at least a couple of the 9 federally recognized tribes. So what we've been hearing is people are interested, but the capacity to participate is not there, which I think a lot of you on the call have heard this concern and know it's something we as an agency are hearing and want to help do something about to make sure we have the right voices at the table. But I just want you all to know that it's been on our minds. We've been working on it. If you have any ideas of people you think would be good to serve that maybe you think we haven't talked to, please let us know, because we really do want to have that person at this table for those conversations. And we're glad Maggie can bring that perspective, though, again, as she said, that's not her precise role in these conversations.
Yes, thanks, Christy. And I think Diane was next, and then Allie.
Hi, yeah. I just wanted to point out that we will be speaking a lot about low-income environmental justice communities, and one of the things that Small Business Utility Advocates is bringing out more and more explicitly is that there are small commercial customers that are a large group, and we heard some very helpful information from the Milwaukee project presenter, the presenter from Milwaukee, Oregon, and that as we discuss as we go through these discussions, I'm glad to hear it's coming out some on how we're working on small businesses, but when we use the terms environmental justice communities, we might need to also mention, in addition, the small businesses, depending on how we define that. And I think that's going to be a process of defining that term and how it includes the small commercial customers and not just residential customers. Bringing that out. Thanks.
Thanks, Diane. And Allie, you had your hand up momentarily and now it's down. I don't know if you had a question.
Yeah, I did. I put it in the chat because it was related to Christy's comment about tribal outreach and just wondering if there's opportunity for a more diverse opportunity to give input rather than joining this committee since the capacity is a huge issue.
Yeah, that is that's valuable feedback, and I think that we'll continue to work to get tribal representation. And I think in the workshop where we talk about benefits, that we can really try to stage some of those questions to get at that at the tribes and how we can bring those benefits to tribal partners. And so it's something that we will continue to work on, and we recognize that 4-hour workshops are a challenge in the world of capacity limitations. So we are working to do better at this one, and I think that as we go along, we will be able to bring that voice into the workshops.
And I'll just add on that we did offer both the idea of being at the table, like officially as a work group member, or doing one-on-one meetings on the topic so that we could get input. And that's how we ended up having some of the conversations, but we didn't hear back from most of the tribes. So we'll keep at it. We really care a lot about this. So we'll keep working on it. But thank you for pushing us. But yeah, no, we're pushing ourselves too, and we'll keep at it.
All righty. Diane and Maggie, your hands are still up. I don't know if those are relics of our first questions. And I think that may be it for questions. So I'd like to move on to a quick overview of the questions that we have put together for this. And this first list, which is on the screen now, is our primary research questions. And these are posted on the website. Again, like the background materials, this is a list that we're building as we go. But this is the first ones that we've developed as kind of our primary research questions. I invite folks to review these and think on them as we go through all of these workshops. But I'd like to actually skip to our discussion questions. And let me see if I can bring those up. Okay, so here's our discussion questions. In some ways, they're interrelated. And what we're planning to do is to have a poll. And the poll is going to take these 7 questions and have all of our participants today within the poll kind of vote on the questions that they think are most important to discuss in our breakout groups. And so we'll give you about 5 minutes during the poll to read them, and I'll go through them very quickly right now. Christy, I see you have something to share.
Yeah, so I think someone else on this call has already gotten my WebEx email, but we tested this out and it worked fine the other day. But of course, currently the polling is not working, and I know Stacy was working on it, but I think Rob missed we're Teams chatting here frantically, being like, the poll is not working. But he's been so focused on you all that he doesn't realize. So we've been talking a little bit about how we could plan B it, and maybe people could just share which you're dividing out by which of these questions, right? Maybe people could share which question number they're most interested in joining a breakout group on just in the comments, and then we can work on breaking out from there. I think that'll work. Stacy, you're welcome to get on and tell us if you think that won't work.
I do have one question from the breakout question or breakout sessions. And I think the poll, it would have been nice, but it's not critical. We have all the questions here, and looking at the numbers of participants, I think we'll end up with somewhere around 10 people per group. And so I would say if you see a question that you think is really important and you want to bring it up, that you can do that within the breakout group. And hopefully we're planning on 20 minutes for the breakout groups. So hopefully we have time to address sort of the most pressing issues. And also we invite the breakout groups to ask a different question if they think that there's one that is critical to the discussion. Again, since this is our ownership and access workshop, we're trying to focus on those ownership and access issues. And so discussions around benefits and costs and things like that will certainly be addressed in great detail in future workshops. And so we're just hoping to keep our breakout groups focused on ownership and access issues. And one question I think for our IT staff, when we break into the groups, will these questions still be visible, or should we direct folks to pull them up from the resources on the website? I don't know, Christy or any of our staff that maybe could answer that. I just want the questions to be accessible for folks as they go into the breakouts.
I'll have to confirm that we got the slide deck up on the website before I can answer that, because I know we were just adding to it as late as this morning. So,
and the slide deck is not up there, but the key questions document is. And this
Rob, I just put the questions in the chat, so to make it easy for anyone, if you want to copy and paste them, or the chat might stay there too. I don't know how that's going to work with breakouts.
Okay, so what you'll see next, and I think probably most people have been through this on a WebEx, but we have randomly assigned 5 breakout rooms. We have moderators for each room, and they will be Oriana, who is part of our planning committee, James Valdez, who is also part of our planning committee, and Mark Nystrom, along with myself and Adam with our staff. So we will be the 5 moderators to help keep notes during the discussions. And you'll see shortly that there will be an invitation to join a breakout room. And we would like to take the time to tackle some of these questions for 20 minutes and then come back as a group and see if we can bring together some key points to take away from the workshop, and of course have more discussion on these questions. So with that, I think we will go into our breakout groups. All right, welcome back. That 20 minutes went really quickly. I thought 20 minutes was a good amount of time, but it really did fly by. So
there's still a lot of people out, and it says 30 seconds until the breakouts will close automatically to get everybody back.
Huh, I just got kicked over here. I didn't opt over.
Yeah, when I look at it, there's still probably a dozen panelists missing. Maybe it gave 20 minutes by the time you went into it or something. I don't know.
Oh, maybe that's it. Am I still sharing my screen?
No.
Okay.
Okay, you're back to having the full array of people.
All righty. So welcome back. And I know that those, at least for our group, the 20 minutes flew by. Felt more like 10. But I think we now have basically the remainder of the time to discuss the major takeaways from these discussions. We can pick up some of our parking lot items if we see fit. But I think before we get into the broader discussion, I would love to just get a quick summary from each of the groups, and maybe I will kick it off to share what we discussed in our group. We had Angela and Dave Moldal with Energy Trust in our group, and Jessica with Oregon Department of Energy, as well as myself. And one thing we just discussed the nature of the questions, all centering around ownership and recognizing that there are a lot of crossover issues, and that identifying those issues are going to be important for steering future workshops. But looking specifically at ownership, We started on question 5. Does Oregon's community solar program support and/or promote diverse ownership models? And I think from the presenters that we had earlier, we can partially answer that question that, yeah, we're seeing some really interesting diverse ownership models, but we also have been hearing a lot of discussion about barriers within the program. The complexity of the program is difficult to navigate. The interconnection process within the program can be challenging for some developers, especially at that community scale where, again, capacity is an issue. And when you have a program with a lot of rules and guidelines, that can be a barrier for participation. And so we all have great hope for that program, and we think that it's doing some good work, but it does have some unique barriers around the administrative complexity that's built up in the program, and just the kind of the nature of some of those interconnection processes have definitely put some projects on hold. So that was our first discussion. And with the ownership connection, any of these barriers sort of get amplified when you have an unusual ownership model that doesn't fit the traditional mold. And so if you're dealing with a whole group or a cooperative of owners, and you have hurdles that come up, especially late in the process, like certain costs associated with interconnection or navigating the program that come in late, you're now having to deal with a whole group of owners rather than just one to try to overcome these challenges. So that was part of it. We also talked a bit about, we got off a little bit on barriers and about how interconnection costs and some of the administrative barriers associated with interconnection are very real for some projects. We talked about the 750 kW cogen biogas plant at City of Medford wastewater treatment plant, and how some late costs associated with interconnection resulted in that project essentially not being able to interconnect to the grid, and that's resulted in 10 years of suboptimal operation. And so this is a project that is owned by a municipality, and these owners, the municipal owners, are in control of a tremendous amount of our critical infrastructure. And so focusing in on some of those barriers, I think, is going to help us really start to get through the resilience discussion and how we can get those projects prioritized and online. So I would invite Angela and Dave to fill in any holes that I've left.
I think that's a great summary, Rob.
Yep, me too. Thanks.
Okay. Adam, do you want to share your group's takeaways?
Yeah, although I think Allie was going to do it for our group. I offered for someone other than Odo to speak up.
I'm happy to diversify the speakers. My group was Ryan, John, Julie, Adam, and Stephanie. Sorry if I left anyone out. It was hard to tell on WebEx who was there. But we talked about the first 4 questions or 3 questions. There was some conversation around the voluntary nature of community ownership and access, and then some questions around how does that actually become equitable access. We also talked a lot about benefits of community ownership, one being the benefits for greenhouse gas emissions, people making directive decisions about where their energy comes from, financial interests, of course, reducing the impact of, larger scale energy projects on natural and cultural resources. The fact that we can direct benefits to communities usually left out of clean and healthy energy, increasing affordability, and making our energy systems more nimble and resilient in the face of disaster. Then we just started talking about the obligations of renewable energy ownership. And we talked a little bit about challenges around financing and maintenance, and then some capacity issues around access for environmental justice communities. And then, yeah, so I think that's mostly what we covered. Hope that rounded it up well.
Thank you, Allie. Yeah, that's, I'm glad you guys tackled the first 4 questions because we were focused more on the end of the list. So maybe we could go to Oriana's group.
Yeah, so we mostly focused on question 3. And my group included Alan from Odo, Jimmy from PGE, Keisha from the Public Utility Commission, and Diane from 350 Deschutes. The question that we spend most of our time on are how are the benefits of ownership different from the benefits that would be realized from third-party ownership models or large-scale renewable projects? And so we talked a little bit about just the benefits of distributed energy resources in directly connecting with community. Some of the things that Ali mentioned that are concerns about larger scale projects that aren't necessarily designed around a community benefit model. And then we were just starting to get into conversation around risk at the end that was very meaty, and we unfortunately got cut off, but trying to weigh are there also risks associated with community ownership? Are the benefits only financial in nature or not tied to ownership at all in terms of reliability, resilience, jobs, or affordability? So we didn't get to dig into that more because I think there was going to be some disagreement in the group around whether that risk issue was really an important thing to name and something that might outweigh the benefits versus whether the benefits are agnostic of ownership. And certainly from the perspective of Verde, who's developing community solar projects with cooperative models in an ideal world, we know that the benefits come from community associated with a project, and that actual structure of an ownership model, if it's something like the People's Power Solar Co-op out of Oakland, that it can have really strong community organizing and political benefits on top of just the typical benefits that come from an energy project or the financial benefits as well. So I think that's important to name. And then we also talked about CPACE, commercial property assessed clean energy financing, a little bit too, as a financing model that hadn't been discussed and is just being adopted. Sounds like pretty successfully in the Bend area for affordable housing providers, but it also has some downsides related to ownership, which is namely where you're at on the position of your loan and how fully you own your property is really dependent on your ability to participate. So that gets into a whole different world of ownership, which is who has access to land, who has access to property historically or presently, and whether you actually can develop a project without a lease agreement in place. And I'll leave it at that.
Great. Thank you, Oriana. James, will you share from one of your members, please share out?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So yeah, in our group, we had Eric Anderson from Pacific Power, Diane Hankels from Small Business Utility Advocates, Representative Mark Owens, Tom McBartlett from Ashland, and Heidi Hawkins, who actually I don't think we heard exactly who she was representing, but we had a conversation mostly centering on the latter part of the questions and a lot on the barriers element of what are regulatory or policy barriers that prevent greater opportunities for ownership. And one that came up was related to consumer-owned utilities in Oregon, and I guess actually throughout the Northwest, where Bonneville Power Administration has a 200 kilowatt limit for new generation. And that goes back to was last signed in 2008 and is potentially going to be I guess, re-looked at in the next round, but this applies to all full requirement contracts that utilities sign with BPA that really penalizes the interconnection of projects over 200 kilowatts. Then we talked about kind of the fundamental challenge for a lot of small businesses to participate in renewable projects because a lot of them don't own the property that they occupy. They're tenants on leases. And so that also is a barrier. We then talked about some potential ways to overcome that or mitigate that through opportunities like virtual net metering and programs that have been put in place in some of the COUs, including Ashland, to allow a sort of virtual bill credit from another project that's not located on their property to then be part of the bill offset for a small business or a residential customer, kind of a version of community solar, but done at the COU level. And then we talked about one of kind of, I guess, a fundamental barrier or exclusion in the current community solar program, in that it's just focused on solar, and how there might be opportunities for irrigation districts or other small renewable generators in wind or small hydro to basically participate in a similar way with different resource under the Oregon Community Solar Program. And so, yeah, we talked a lot about kind of some of the bigger structural barriers, but didn't get into a lot of the questions, we have to admit. And anybody else from the group want to add anything, or?
Great.
Thanks for,
Thank you,
thanks for
James.
that, Jamie. Yep. James.
Oh, go ahead, Diane.
No, I just said thanks, James. It was a good conversation. Time went fast.
Okay. Great. Mark, will you share from your group?
Sure. Hi, everyone. We had Dan Orzik, Mike MacArthur, Nikita Dariani, Ron Feast, and then Maggie Gallagher in our group. And there was one other person from the phone that I didn't connect her name. We spent a lot of time just talking about ownership and community access. And we really tried to focus in on, or everyone seemed to agree that locally owned solar is what we want, or projects are what we want. We don't want large corporations. We want that ownership and any kind of financial benefit to come from it to be held locally, and that provides a lot of resilience. It provides jobs, and it helps with energy burden. One of the interesting things, though, that we talked about is that the language is really inadequate. It's hard to have locally owned projects without tax equity partners, which really limit the ownership for an organization or for a community. And so with that, there needs to be some sort of change there around the tax burden piece. And we also spent some time talking about tribal nations. There's a huge discrepancy in access to electricity, and that how some of the co-op boards are set up are set up actually by meters. And if you don't have a meter, you don't get a vote. And if you don't have electricity, you don't have a meter. So there's a lot of equity issues there that need to be dealt with. We spent a lot of time talking about that, but then we jumped into the primary regulatory barriers. Just a couple of the things that are in front of the PUC right now. Interconnects are one of the big pieces that we talked about, needing to understand how those interconnects work, and need to know the cost. And then there was a discussion about sufficiency. Some utilities saying that they have sufficient generation capacity, but then they're still purchasing off the grid for peak loads, and so dealing with that issue. And then finally, one piece that I'm just kind of synthesizing together is that for a lot of the community groups and people like me, we need to learn more about financing, and that we that a lot of this this material for people who do this as a part-time gig. Yeah, I'm focused on other issues in climate. A lot of the language starts to become really murky and convoluted and difficult to wade through. So I think in general, we could improve our access to some of this just through better education for people like me.
Great. Any others from Mark's group that want to share? That sounded like an excellent discussion. I think there's some good takeaways there. All right. So thank you all for the breakout discussions. Thanks to our moderators. I think that there are certainly as many questions as there are answers that have kind of come from this this exercise. It is, let's see, we have about 50 minutes left before we wrap this up. I'd like to circle around to some of the kind of the main takeaways, and also the maybe filling out some additional parking lot questions that we might kick to future workshops. And then at the end of the meeting, we also have the option for some public comment. And so I don't know if that's going to be a part of this meeting or not, but we need to build a little bit of time in for that. So with that said, I wonder if we should just go ahead and jump into some main takeaways. Is everybody feeling good about just plowing on with our agenda here? All right. I'll ask a different question. Does anybody need a 5-minute break? And just give a thumbs up or something like that if you want to do a break. We could take a short break and come back to the discussion if you like.
So a couple yeses for breaks.
Yeses, yeah.
Okay, so maybe we will take a 5-minute break and come back right around 12:15 and try to wrap some of this up. And I've got a few notes to share, but I certainly welcome thoughts from any of our participants today. And I hope we can get to some takeaways and also maybe tackle some of the challenging questions, like maybe the risk question that Ariana brought up in a discussion starting at 12:16. So we will see you all back here then and wrap this up. So thank you. All right. Welcome back. Maybe we'll give an extra minute for cushion here. Okay, let's pick it back up. And before I start, I would just welcome anyone else who has some thoughts to jump in and share. I do have some to share, but I don't want to do all the talking here. So anyone wants to jump in, main takeaways and discussion from the breakout groups or earlier topics in the workshop, please have at it. Yes, Allie.
Yeah, I really appreciated today's workshop. I feel like I learned a lot and I think it met people at various levels. I think one improvement for the future is hearing from the folks who have benefited from these projects, hearing more from a community level. In addition to all the great perspectives we heard today, I feel like that voice is one that is so critical for this conversation, but was not able to be heard today.
Thanks for that. And I think that's a really good point. And, you know, the discussion around benefits is very closely related to the discussion around ownership. And we do have another workshop that is specific to, you know, to talk about some benefits of projects. But I think that there are some benefits that we could discuss here today to see how both local ownership and different ownership models may be able to deliver benefits at a local level. And that is certainly fair game for our discussion of ownership models, is how that that changes the way that benefits may flow. I think we've had a few clear examples in our discussion so far, and you know, one of them was to try to keep financial benefits locally within a community. In as much as these projects have cash flow, that cash flow retained locally has continuing economic value to a community. So that is one. Another one that we've heard over and over is resilience and the benefit of small scale projects to provide local resilience is becoming very apparent. And for me, one of the clear ownership overlays on this one is the municipal ownership, or at least municipal partnerships, where municipalities are often involved with a lot of the critical infrastructure within a community. And so enabling municipalities to control local energy resources for the benefit of the community, I think is one way to ensure that we get some of those benefits at the local level. And Oriana mentioned with the, oh, go ahead, Diane.
Thanks. Hi, Rob. I was interested in learning whether Odo had inquired about getting the update on that report on the community multiplier effect of the, you know, of the projects. I had sent the information in months ago and to the, you know, when this was first getting organized in December or January, I guess it was. A long time ago, there was an NREL studies or studies that NREL referred to, and they could certainly use updating, but there was that concept of the multiplier effect, and I just didn't know if Odo's got any update on that. Mostly referring to the benefits to the local communities of these projects, right?
Yeah. Thanks for that. And we have actually been able to add an economist to our staff since that time. And so we are able to dig a little deeper on those types of issues. I will open this up to others because I don't have an answer in the short term for if we've made any headway on the community multiplier, you know, within Oregon and how we can forward that. Any thoughts from others?
I'll go ahead and step in. Hi, I'm Stephanie Bowles. I'm the new economist that Rob just mentioned. Community multipliers are definitely something that we will be incorporating into the economic benefits. So it is on the list, long list, but we will be incorporating that in that section. That'll be workshop 3.
Thank you, Stephanie. Any other thoughts on the kind of financial side of the benefits? And I know when we talk about benefits that it's not always directly tied to ownership. And I do have a couple of more that are a little more specifically tied to ownership. But Keisha.
Okay, sorry, the mute problem there. A few thoughts to share came out of the group. So in our group, Jimmy brought up that a lot of the financial benefits are kind of, or not just financial benefits, sorry. There are some benefits that come from these renewable energy projects that are agnostic to where the resource is and what the ownership structure is. And so in terms of its ability to, get Oregon toward its goal of decarbonizing. So for one, and that there are high transaction costs when you have community ownership. And I think that was kind of experienced by the Solarized Rogue project. The community solar projects require, recruitment of individual subscribers. So it's, I think there is an understanding that the local ownership has challenges. City of Milwaukee introduced the challenges just from a kind of a staffing capacity perspective and how this fits into the priorities of what the municipality is trying to do. But clearly it's been expressed that there's interest in this. I mean, that people want this, and that their interest in being part of a community that has this sense of ownership and a real tangible project to connect it to, and the potential resilience benefits that you mentioned. The irrigation district project was a great example of financial benefits staying in the community and being realized for community benefit for very, long-term solutions. So, it seems like there are some models that have worked really well, like the irrigation district, others that have been challenging. And I think from the perspective, from kind of the big picture perspective of decarbonization, where are the best opportunities, and where does it make sense to focus on community ownership, and where does it maybe make sense to focus on other access, other opportunities for access?
Yeah, that does kind of open up the discussion around how the benefits associated with decarbonization and meeting both local and state goals around renewable energy development. This is going to require a lot of new resources, and the ownership model plays some part of the discussion, but the size as well. The 200 megawatt project compared to the 2 megawatt project. I know that those large projects are out of the scale of this discussion, but there are, all of these projects ultimately provide the benefit of decarbonized electricity to the grid. And some of those, like you said, are agnostic to ownership. So Jimmy, I see your hand is up.
Rob, yeah, as Keisha mentioned, we had a little bit of this conversation in our breakout group, and it's just, I think it's important for us as a group to kind of all be on the same page. Is like, what do we mean when we're talking about ownership? And at least how I was how I'm interpreting it and kind of conceptualizing it is we're talking about like who actually has like title to the solar equipment, or the renewable energy equipment in this instance. And yeah, I think a lot of the, many of the kind of core benefits of local community renewable energy are ownership agnostic in my viewpoint. Issues related to resiliency and reliability, issues related to like incremental renewable energy and having sort of possession of RECs and the title to those claims, issues related to affordability, having like bill credits. Those are sort of ownership agnostic in my viewpoint. They can be achieved whether you're the sort of owner of that solar equipment or if you're leasing it. And at least as I was kind of communicating in our group, I think many of the benefits associated with ownership in a sort of strictly financial and property way, like relate to the opportunity for, income and profit and having cash flows that exceed costs. And I think that is a very real benefit that should be discussed, but it's also not a risk-free proposition. And was just sharing my viewpoint that, with the income opportunity associated with owning renewable energy also comes the risk of financial loss. And was sharing a few anecdotes from PG's perspective where through contracting with renewable energy developers, we see entities like experience that risk in a rather direct way. So thanks, Keisha, for queuing that up, and just wanted to share that thinking as well.
Yeah, thanks for that. And that does get to some of kind of the obligations around ownership as well. So Oriana and then James.
I feel like I've weighed in on this issue already, so I'll maybe hear from James and then see if there's anything to add.
Yeah, thanks, Oriana, and thanks, Jimmy, for that perspective and kind of breaking some of that down. And I guess, I think maybe we do need to define a shared understanding of what we mean by ownership, because I think it can be more expansive than just, the asset ownership or the title to the property. And just also noting how in some financial structures that actually changes over time. The Oregon flip model was used for a while in Oregon as a way to capture tax equity benefit to people who, wanted to leverage that. And then sometimes those projects then changed ownership in year 6 or 7 to a different long-term beneficiary. And so I think there's a question of certainly there's a huge question of equity of who has opportunity for tax deferment and the social benefit of that, that I think we should take a deep look at, because it's deeply inequitable and reinforces a lot of wealth centralization in our society. But that's an aside and not an official perspective of the city of Portland. But I think in a broader sense, ownership can mean getting to decide where a project happens, or having a say in, how a project comes together, or who gets certain parts of the benefits. And so, I think there is both the technical ownership and legal structure of the financing that Jimmy mentioned, but then also a broader conversation about community empowerment and the opportunities to have agency within developing projects. And I think that is a just broader definition of ownership than just the narrow view. So yeah, I guess I just want to bring that up.
Thank you, James. And Oriana, any follow-up?
Yeah, I do have follow-up, which is that I think, at least from our perspective as an organization that serves community and is seeking to develop projects that provide benefit from community, I don't think we agree with the premise that benefits are agnostic of ownership. They may not be dependent on certain ownership models, that you may be able to provide affordability or resilience or other benefits, but to suggest that they are completely kind of don't care essentially about the ownership model, I don't think that is true, in the sense that self-determination is important to community, and the development of a project that drives those benefits is more possible when community has ownership over the project, and not just ownership over like the development of the project. itself, but also the ownership of the equipment and the financing structure. Like that matters because community does not have a siloed experience of these different kinds of benefits. Having them wrapped into a self-determination and an ownership model is really important from the perspective of the work that we do. So I think it's important to think about what ownership means in different ways, but it's also important to think about how benefits are tied to ownership models in different ways. And I think from a community perspective, we just don't necessarily see that. Maybe from a system-wide perspective, it may feel agnostic, but on the ground, in terms of how community ties to a project, I don't think that's how people experience things from the perspective of what ownership can mean. And I think, to James's point, one of the challenges that comes up is that our incentive systems are designed to benefit certain kinds of entities that have certain kinds of economic and political power. And that even though this group isn't necessarily going to be influencing federal policy, there still needs to be a push for financing streams and mechanisms that can be utilized by community projects and nonprofit projects and tribal projects in ways that are not so narrow. So I think that drives how ownership benefits can flow in a way that's really important and is not necessarily agnostic as well. Because if community can't have ownership of a project because it's too hard to make the financing stream work, then that resilience and affordability benefit, it has less meaning to a community than if a community can actually own the project and have dividends from that project and have governance of that project and how it continues over time. So I think that's an important element as well from our perspective.
Yeah. Thanks, Oriana. Adam and then Angela.
Yeah, I just want to throw out a point, because I've heard a lot of discussion of sort of community direction over procurement and community kind of input over goals and that sort of thing. I'm just curious the perspective on, I would assume that the legislature, that's presumably why HB 2021 and 100% clean energy standard was adopted. The community of Oregon has really aggressive clean energy standards and goals. So I'm just curious, how does that differentiate? It seems that as a statewide community, we are all moving in the same direction.
Angela?
Yeah, thanks. I really want to agree with what both James and Oriana brought up of the importance of, I mean, there is something different about owning and putting together a project as opposed to just realizing the benefits from those projects. But I've really been thinking about the city of Milwaukee and the story they told of how they really wanted to own a project and develop it themselves. And it was too hard even for a city and all of the capacity and resources that a city has. And so clearly we need to make this easier for communities to own and build and develop projects, because it is not easy now. So I'm glad we're having this discussion, and I hope the study will come up with some recommendations of how we can make the development and ownership of projects easier for communities.
Yeah. Thank you, Angela. Ellie, I saw your hand go up and down. I don't know if you have, if that was your comments is made or not.
No, I was going to respond to Adam's question. I don't think it's fair to look at the entire state of Oregon as a community and see like, oh, there are community benefits because we have this goal to transition to 100% clean energy. Of course there are, but that has to happen on the ground in communities led by people who like are impacted and who see the benefits or see the impacts of these projects. So we know Oregon is made up of many different communities, and many different communities that face differing challenges and have differing level of resources and support and capacity. And so we need to think about co-benefits in this conversation as like, what does that look like on the ground? What is tangible for people in these communities directly, rather than like so zoomed out that we can just say there are benefits there, right? But how can we really embrace and emphasize benefits by listening to communities and what they want, and like making those projects as doable as possible, which, you know, currently there are so many different barriers to. So that was just my response to Adam's last statement.
Yeah, James, your hand is up. I don't know if that's a relic from before or if, okay, there we go. Adam.
I'll just respond real quick. I mean, I think the analysis I've seen shows that the least cost decarbonization results in the most economic benefits that flow. So that's why I was really curious to hear more discussion of what are the concrete benefits from direct community ownership models. So I've heard some of that. I think avoided land use impacts is a big one, resilience. So I'm curious to hear more of that discussion of sort of what tangibly, what are those benefits? You know, if it's GHG emissions, that's a ambient air emissions. I think you're going to get the same from a small scale project as a large scale. Clean energy, same. So I'm kind of curious, what are those real tangible benefits that flow to communities or that don't perceive don't flow today that could?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely kind of the question here. And I've heard a couple, you know, when a community organizes around a project, you end up with certain decisions around siting, like James mentioned, and even just the community organization, like Ariana mentioned, that potentially gets us over some of the NIMBY issues that we have in Oregon at this local level. And I know that we have a need for tremendous amounts of new renewables. And so the NIMBY discussion is not going to be entirely solved with community-led projects. But there are a couple of clear advantages to community-led projects with this local siting consideration and local buy-in to you know, a project that is more universally accepted and loved by the community. Because a lot of these projects, you know, we see a lot of NIMBYism in Oregon, even though we also have a lot of community support for projects. So I think there is something there. Dan, and then Nikita.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. So, you know, at the risk of pointing out the obvious, the discussion about the relative benefits of central generation versus distributed generation is, you know, is a national or global discussion, not limited to us here in Oregon. I think we already heard today some of the benefits of distributed generation from Eric at Pacific Power talking about grid regulation benefits from some of their projects. And anyone who's visited the PGE microgrid in the south side of Salem knows how that helped with voltage regulation on the PGE grid when they had voltage sags. So there's all sorts of benefits. And on the ownership side, you know, in addition to low-income communities and the other communities that we've already heard about, I just want to mention two more. One is what Mike from CREA mentioned in our breakout group, which is the agricultural community, and how when PURPA became not viable in Oregon, a lot of local farmers were disappointed that they're not able to participate in electrical generation. And another community is one that we deal with on a regular basis, which is what I call community organizations. So that's nonprofits and churches, small businesses who are really, you know, to a large extent excluded. They're certainly excluded from participating in the community solar program. And a lot of them that we hear from are very disappointed about that.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. And Nikita?
Thank you. I'm sorry. I feel like I'm actually responding to a point that was made earlier, but I guess it was also responsive to a point, Adam, that you made just now. But yeah, just highlighting what Ali said about Oregon being made up of different communities with different needs and resources and capacity. And I guess I see community-based projects as being as having the ability or the potential to play a big role in filling these needs. But just hammering again that point about the importance of ownership is that these specific needs can get lost if we're if we are treating ownership, or if we're treating these benefits as ownership agnostic, because I think that's yeah, just wanted to hammer that that point that I think is really important, because those specific needs that I see community-based renewables as playing a very important role in filling are really dependent upon what the community needs. And I think ownership is a really important way to make sure that those are being realized in a way that's not treating all benefits, not treating all communities as the same, and that they need the same benefits. And I guess, Adam, to your point about, you know, wanting to hear more tangibly about what those benefits are, I think Ali mentioned or suggested earlier hearing from like communities who are yeah, hearing from communities who maybe have been engaged in or like helping ramp up or build up or develop projects in their communities would be really important. I think getting sort of a sense for what that community engagement has looked like, I think can be really helpful.
Thank you, Nikita. Ryan.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. So I was thinking kind of a little bit about a few of the comments that were made that are all really great comments. And one of the things Nikita just said, not all communities are the same, right? And I think that will be an interesting part of this, and the benefit, right? We will likely see many different types of projects, many different types of structures. One of the things that we did, you know, our project at Central Electric, it is a subscription-based model, not an ownership. The individual doesn't own the panel; they own the benefit from that. But to provide that kind of involvement of community, our community being the membership, that member base, we created a working group that they were able to kind of voice and have the involvement, still be able to have that participation in the development of the project as kind of a sounding board. So I think that was a benefit, and still kind of broke down a little bit of the barriers to not having that ownership in the subscription-based model. One of the things that I think we kind of talked about in our breakout group and that came out was the opportunity needs to be equitable, but it still needs to be this voluntary ownership, or voluntary ownership of the panel potentially, or the subscription based. But you want to ensure that it is an equitable distribution of the offering. And I think that was always an important part for us. And that comes from proper communication, proper education, and then breaking down these economical barriers that are considered, you know. So I think there's going to be a lot of different types of projects to be successful, but that's also going to play into a lot of the things that we've discussed, like grid resiliency and diversification as well. So.
Yeah, thank you, Ryan.
I feel like I come in as the hook. If you see my screen come on. Hi, I just was thinking, looking at the clock, we wanted to save some time for public comment and talk about next steps. So I just thought it might be a good time to remind folks that this is the beginning of a conversation, that we sent around some materials today toward helping us put together the report that we'll be doing as a group. And Rob can tell you a little more about accepting feedback and thoughts and ideas. So this is not the end of the conversation today at all. I just wanted to make sure people don't feel cut off and know that we'll keep going, but just not right now. And then Rob, you can go ahead with any other next steps. We do have workshop planning committee meetings happening, and our next workshop I think is scheduled for June 3rd. So stay tuned for that. It should be on your calendars, and then I'll turn things over to Rob.
All righty. Thanks, Christy. And just a question, do you know if we have members of the public that are waiting to make comments? I don't know if we're able to tell that in our list or not, but yeah, I think we got to some good takeaways here. And I think that what Adam brought up about these true tangible differentiation between ownership models and how those benefits differ, and what drives the need for diverse ownership, and how those benefits can change according to according to kind of the ownership model. it's really the type of content that we're trying to get to with this study, to describe why ownership matters, recognizing that a project that brings renewable energy and battery storage to a community is going to bring value to that community, regardless of who owns it. But the ownership can mean that it brings even more value because there's community buy-in, and that the siting was thoughtful, that there might be some financial benefit that stays local, and it might organize the community to take charge of their energy decisions. And so trying to get at that differentiation, I think, will help. And I think we can pick that up in the benefits discussion in future workshops, for how we really differentiate how benefits are affected by ownership and even size and interconnection style or type. And there's some crossover questions here that I think this discussion will help us to tee up. And so I think that we are in the wrap-up stage here, and in the interest of sticking to our promises in the agenda, we do want to enable public comments to flow in. And I see that there are 10 attendees, and so maybe this is where we have a pool of public folks. So I will maybe throw it back to Christy or Sheila or someone in our team to see if there are some comments that are trying to come in.
Yeah, so at this point, anybody who's on as an attendee, which it turns out includes one of our members who I just found out was one of our people on the phone. I'm so sorry, Councillor Uffelman. I did not know that that was you down there. But if anyone hasn't had a chance to, if anyone that's here is a member of the public, or Councillor Uffelman, of course, wants to say anything for the good of the order, you can raise your hand. If you're on the phone, you press *3 to raise your hand, and then we'll know to unmute you. And then if anyone else can raise a hand if they have any comments that they'd like to make to the work group. You're also welcome to say anything or ask anything in the comments, in the chat. Great, and I'm emailing Councillor Uffelman. I didn't realize that he was in there on the phone, so I'll see if we can get his input in another way.
All right, and like Christy said, this is
now we have a hand up. Sorry.
Oh, there we go. All right.
Stacy, do you want to unmute the 420-541-420?
There we go.
You should be able to talk now. Hello, if you have the 541-420 number, you can talk now. You might need to unmute yourself on your phone or press *6 if that's still not working. So
we're not hearing you.
Yeah, now we should be able to hear you.
Okay, all I had to communicate at this point was thank you for including me. I'm sorry that my cell phone or my computer didn't access it, but I appreciated all the comments were made by multiple parties on this presentation. Thank you.
Great, thank you. We'll make sure we get your technical issues worked out in time for next time.
Thank you.
So I think that's it.
All right, so for next steps, we will continue to maintain this list of questions. And I think we've developed a few additional questions that we can put in the parking lot that have some crossover to future workshops. As Christy mentioned, we will be engaging those of you who have self-selected into the planning committees for our future workshops. Those meetings will be coming up soon. And so, you know, if you have thoughts that come out of this meeting you are welcome to share those for the weeks and even months to come. And so this is not the last opportunity to share those. So we ask that you all continue to think about the ownership topics and those questions. And if you have thoughts, reach out to us, and we have plenty of opportunity to gather those and to tee up the crossover items for future workshops. And I think with that said, if there are no other comments from either our work group or from the public, we would be happy to let folks start signing off. And again, thank you all for attending and for spending 4 hours with us. Feel free to throw stuff into the chat while this thing is still open, and we can capture those. Yeah, look forward to seeing you all in the meetings to come.
Diane asked if we would post the chat. I think we don't usually post the chat, but we could. I'll look into it. We do post the video, but I could at least send you the chat.
That would be great. The concept is that the chat's a great note taking, right? And if it's available, I can understand where you might not want to post it, but if there's like a way, to send it out, that would be great.
Thanks, Nan.
Thank you.
All right. I think Mike and Heidi are still on, but Heidi and Mike, do either of you need anything? Maybe they just stepped away.
Just a note I sent to Rob, a lot of focus on solar here, and I probably my fault for not suggesting it earlier, but small wind is also something that I think we should pay some attention to. And Ormond Hildebrand from PATU is very interested in this. He was on today. He didn't know about it initially. I let him know, but he's got a lot of experience in developing a PURPA wind project.
Okay.
Great. I didn't catch that name, but I would like to. So I don't know if that was part
I got it.
You got it?
Okay, I can. Yeah. All right. If you need it.
Yeah, you just talked to Ruchi just met with him, right? Not too long ago. So I was on an email thread with his name and contact info. I can get to him.
He's on all the Korea stuff. Of course, he's our vice chair.
Great. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah. Good show, guys. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Mike. It's good to hear you.
Thanks.